Imagine a quiet highway late at night. The only sounds are the hum of tires on asphalt and the whisper of the wind. A pair of headlights slices through the darkness, but as the car passes, something is missing. There's no rumble, no growl, no roar of a combustion engine, just a faint, futuristic whine. This isn't a scene from today. This is the 1990s. And that car was the General Motors EV1. Long before Tesla became a household name, before charging stations dotted our cities, GM launched a car that seemed to leap straight out of science fiction. The EV1 wasn't a hybrid, and it wasn't a concept car that would never see the light of day. It was a real, mass-produced, fully electric vehicle that you could actually lease. It was sleek, aerodynamic, and felt like driving the future. It had a keyless ignition, a digital dash, and an incredibly quiet, smooth ride. Drivers who leased it fell in love with it. They were pioneers, part of an exclusive club driving the car of tomorrow, today. But here's where the story takes a dark and mysterious turn. After pouring $1 billion into its development and creating a community of passionate owners, GM abruptly decided to pull the plug. They didn't just stop making the EV1. They actively recalled every single one of them. Despite protests, despite offers from drivers to buy their beloved cars outright, GM refused. The leases ended, and the cars were taken away. So what happened? Why would a company spend a fortune to create a revolutionary product, only to systematically hunt it down and destroy it? This is the story of the car that could have changed the world, the electric dream that came too soon. Was it a conspiracy by big oil, a failure of technology, or a calculated business decision that backfired spectacularly? To understand why nearly every EV1 ended up in a crusher, we need to go back to the very beginning. Our story starts not in a high-tech lab, but under the sunny skies of California. In the late 1980s, the state was choking on smog. Air quality was a massive public health crisis, and regulators were desperate for a solution. This led to the creation of the Zero-Emission Vehicle, or ZEV mandate. This was a radical piece of legislation that required major automakers selling cars in California to ensure a certain percentage of their sales were zero-emission vehicles. If they didn't comply, they could face huge fines or even be banned from selling cars in the state altogether. The auto industry was stunned. They called the mandate impossible, claiming the technology just wasn't ready. But the law was the law. Faced with this challenge, GM, the largest automaker in the world at the time, decided to take it head-on. They assembled a crack team of engineers and designers and gave them a mission: build a viable electric car from the ground up. This wasn't about converting a gasoline car. It was about reimagining what a car could be. The project, initially called Impact, was a showcase of GM's engineering prowess. They obsessed over every detail to maximize efficiency. The car's body was made of lightweight composite panels. Its shape was one of the most aerodynamic ever designed for a production vehicle, with a drag coefficient that rivals even modern supercars. Every curve, every line was designed to slip through the air with minimal resistance. They developed special low-rolling resistance tires and regenerative braking, a system that captures energy during deceleration to recharge the batteries, a feature now standard in all EVs and hybrids. The result of all this innovation was the EV1. When it was unveiled, it was a sensation. It looked like nothing else on the road. The public was fascinated. Here was tangible proof that the electric car wasn't just a fantasy. It was real, and it was here. GM launched the car in 1996 through a special leasing program. You couldn't just walk into any dealership and get one. The process was selective, aimed at early adopters in California and Arizona. The people who leased the EV1 weren't just customers. They became evangelists for the electric future. They loved the instant torque, the silent operation, and the fact they never had to visit a gas station again. They hosted electric car parties and proudly showed off their futuristic rides. But behind the scenes, the picture wasn't so rosy. The original EV1 used lead-acid batteries, similar to the one that starts your gas car. They were heavy, expensive, and offered a limited range, about 60 to 80 miles on a full charge, which could drop significantly in cold weather. Charging took several hours. While this was acceptable for many commuters, it was a major hurdle for mass adoption. GM knew this was a problem. Later, they introduced a second-generation EV1 with more advanced nickel-metal hydride batteries. This was a game-changer. The range nearly doubled to over 140 miles, making the car far more practical for everyday use. The demand was there. There was a waiting list with thousands of people eager to lease one. The technology was improving, the public was interested, and the owners were passionate. Everything seemed to be pointing towards a bright electric future. So why did GM slam on the brakes? This is where the official story from GM and the stories from EV1 drivers and engineers begin to diverge sharply, leading to one of the biggest controversies in modern automotive history. According to GM, the EV1 program was simply an unprofitable experiment. They claimed the car was too expensive to build and that there wasn't a broad enough market for it. They argued that maintaining a small fleet of specialized vehicles with unique parts and service requirements was a financial black hole. From a purely business perspective, they said, continuing the program made no sense. They had fulfilled the requirements of their compliance with the ZEV mandate, and now it was time to move on. But many people involved didn't buy it. They pointed to that long waiting list as proof of demand. Engineers who worked on the project felt their creation was being killed just as it was beginning to prove itself. And the drivers, who had built their lives around these cars, felt betrayed. They organized protests, held vigils, and even offered GM millions of dollars to buy the remaining cars. Their plea was simple: don't crush our cars, let us keep them. Let us buy them. The answer was a firm no. GM insisted that they could unsell the cars due to liability concerns and the cost of supplying parts and service for the next decade. And so the trucks came. One by one, the EV1s were collected from their heartbroken drivers. Most were transported to a GM facility in the desert and systematically crushed into metal pancakes. A few were disabled and donated to museums or universities, silent monuments to what could have been. The sight of these futuristic cars being destroyed became a powerful symbol. To many, it looked like a corporation deliberately killing its own brilliant creation. This led to a storm of conspiracy theories. The most popular one, famously highlighted in the documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car?, is that GM caved to pressure from the oil industry. The logic was simple: if electric cars succeeded, oil demand would plummet, and the powerful oil lobby would lose billions. Another theory pointed to internal resistance within GM itself. Dealerships and service departments make a lot of money from oil changes, tune-ups, and engine repairs maintenance that electric cars simply don't need. The EV1 threatened a huge part of their business model. Was the electric car killed from the outside, or was it an inside job? The reality is likely a complex mix of all these factors. The ZEV mandate, which had forced GM's hand, was weakened over time, partly due to intense lobbying from automakers. Without that regulatory pressure, the primary motivation for the program vanished. The batteries, while improving, were still incredibly expensive, making the car unprofitable without a massive scale of production. And yes, there was certainly internal fear and resistance to a technology that would disrupt a century-old business model built around the internal combustion engine. GM was a massive, conservative company. The EV1 was radical, and perhaps just too radical for its own parent. Ultimately, GM may have seen the EV1 not as the future, but as a compliance CARB box they had to check to satisfy regulators. Once they could get out of the requirement, they did. And the easiest way to close the book on the unprofitable project was to erase the evidence. By crushing the cars, they ensured there would be no long-term liability, no lingering fleet of old cars needing support, just a clean break. But they didn't just crush cars. They crushed a movement. And in doing so, they left the door wide open for a new player to enter the scene a few years later. When a small startup in Silicon Valley called Tesla Motors announced their plan to build a high-performance electric sports car, many were skeptical. But they learned from the EV1's story. They focused on high-performance luxury cars first to justify the high cost of batteries. And they built their own charging network to solve the infrastructure problem. In a way, the ghost of the EV1 paved the road for Tesla's success. It showed what was possible, and its failure provided a perfect roadmap of what not to do. Today, nearly every major automaker is racing to produce electric vehicles. GM itself is now investing billions into its all-electric future, with cars like the Bolt and the Hummer EV. It's a strange irony. The very company that once crushed its own electric car is now betting its entire future on them. The ideas pioneered by the EV1, aerodynamic design, regenerative braking, and a focus on efficiency, are now industry standards. The story of the GM EV1 is a cautionary tale. It's a story about innovation, corporate vision, or lack thereof, and the powerful forces that resist change. It was a car ahead of its time, a glimpse of a future that arrived, was rejected, and then had to be reborn. The dream of the electric car didn't die in that desert scrapyard. It just went into hibernation, waiting for the right company at the right time to finally bring it to life for good. Thank you so much for watching. The story of the EV1 is one of our favorites because it has such a fascinating mix of technology, politics, and passion. What do you think? Was GM right to pull the plug, or was it one of the biggest blunders in automotive history? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the cars and technology that shape our world. We'll see you in the next one. Picture this. It's the 1960s. The air is buzzing with change. Rock and roll is on the radio, and the open road is calling. But a haze is starting to form, not just in the air but in our collective consciousness. In cities like Los Angeles, a thick yellow-brown smog is becoming a daily reality, a visible sign that our love affair with the gas-guzzling automobile has a downside. People were starting to cough, their eyes were watering, and they were looking at their tailpipes with a newfound suspicion. Then the 1970s hit, and things got even more serious. Suddenly, you're seeing long lines at gas stations, signs that say, "Sorry, no gas today," and the price of fuel is skyrocketing. The oil crises of 1973 and 1979 were a massive wake-up call. For the first time, a whole generation realized that the fuel they depended on wasn't infinite. It was a vulnerable resource, controlled by forces far away. The dream of endless, cheap driving was hitting a major roadblock. This perfect storm of smoggy cities and fuel shortages lit a fire under some of the brightest minds in the auto industry. They started asking a radical question. What if we didn't need gasoline at all? What if we could power our cars with something cleaner, something more sustainable? It was in this climate of crisis and curiosity that the electric dream was quietly being reborn. Now you might think electric cars are a 21st century invention, a product of Silicon Valley and tech billionaires. But you'd be wrong. The seeds were planted much, much earlier. Let's take a trip back to 1966. While the Beatles were releasing Revolver, engineers at General Motors were tinkering with something truly revolutionary, the Electrovair 2. This wasn't some clunky golf cart. They took a sporty Chevrolet Corvair, a car famous for being a bit of a rebel, and ripped out its air-cooled gasoline engine. In its place they installed a state-of-the-art silver-zinc battery system and an AC induction motor. The result? A car that could go from 0 to 60 in 16 seconds and hit a top speed of 80 miles per hour. For a 1960s electric car, that was mind-blowing performance. It was sleek, it was silent, and it produced zero emissions. It was a glimpse of the future. But the Electrovair wasn't alone. It was part of a secret world of early electric experiments. GM also built the Electrovan in the same year, a van powered by a hydrogen fuel cell, an incredibly advanced piece of tech for the time. It was heavy, complex, and the hydrogen tanks took up most of the cargo space, but it worked. It proved that there were other ways to generate electricity on board a vehicle. Across the industry, other companies were playing with the idea too. There were countless forgotten prototypes, garage-built specials, and university projects. These weren't just science fair projects. They were serious attempts by passionate engineers to solve a growing problem. They were the pioneers, working with battery technology that was frankly primitive by today's standards. Their batteries were heavy, expensive, and didn't hold much charge. The range was often limited to just a few dozen miles. So why did these incredible innovations just fade away? Well, the oil started flowing freely again, gas prices came back down, and the public's memory is short. The urgency disappeared. The immense cost and technical challenges of these early EVs, especially the batteries, were just too much to overcome at the time. The world, it seemed, wasn't quite ready. The gasoline engine, with its decades of development and massive infrastructure, was still the undisputed king of the road. These early electric dreams were quietly shelved. The Electrovair, the Electrovan, and their forgotten brethren were relegated to museum basements and dusty corners of automotive history. It was a classic case of an idea being ahead of its time. The engineers had the vision, but the technology and the political will just weren't there to back it up. But here's the thing about a good idea. It never truly dies. It just goes dormant, waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge. The lessons learned from these early experiments. The problems they couldn't solve and the sheer audacity of their vision didn't vanish. They became the foundation, the unanswered questions that would linger in the minds of the next generation of engineers. They set the stage for a dramatic comeback. The spark of innovation, born from the smog and fuel crises of the 60s and 70s, hadn't been extinguished. It was just waiting, a tiny ember glowing in the background, ready to be fanned back into a roaring flame decades later when the world would once again find itself in desperate need of a cleaner, better way to move. The storm had passed for now, but the spark remained, waiting for its moment. Thank you so much for watching. If you're fascinated by the hidden history of technology and innovation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our story. We'd love to have you join our community. See you in the next video. Welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into Chapter 2, the 1990s, a decade that sparked a new environmental awakening and set the stage for the electric cars we see today. If you missed Chapter 1, be sure to check it out to get the full story. As the 90s dawned, the world was waking up to a harsh reality. The smog in our cities wasn't just an eyesore. It was a serious health hazard. The air was thick with pollution, a constant reminder of our heavy reliance on fossil fuels. People were starting to connect the dots between the cars they drove every day and the quality of the air they breathed. This growing concern wasn't just happening in grassroots environmental groups. It was reaching the halls of power, especially in one particular state known for its progressive stance: California. The Golden State was choking on its own success. Its car-centric culture had created a massive air quality problem, particularly in Los Angeles. The California Air Resources Board, or CARB, decided it was time for a drastic change. They weren't just going to ask automakers to be a little cleaner. They were going to force a revolution. In 1990, CARB introduced a groundbreaking policy that would send shockwaves through the entire automotive industry: the Zero Emission Vehicle Mandate, or ZV mandate. The mandate was audacious. It required that by 1998, 2% of all new cars sold in California by the state's largest automakers had to be zero-emission vehicles. By 2003, that number would jump to 10%. Think about that for a second. At the time, the concept of a mass-produced electric car was science fiction for most people. There were no Teslas, no Leafs, no Bolts. Automakers were being told to invent, produce, and sell a product that didn't really exist yet on a massive scale. This wasn't a suggestion. It was the law. If automakers wanted to continue selling their profitable gasoline cars in the massive California market, they had to play by these new rules. This put the giants of Detroit in a very tricky position. They could fight it, they could ignore it, and pull out of California, a disastrous business move, or they could accept the challenge. Now let's be clear. The big automakers, especially General Motors, weren't suddenly overcome with a deep love for Mother Earth. Their business model was built on the internal combustion engine. Decades of engineering, manufacturing, and marketing were all tied to gasoline. Electric vehicles were a threat to their entire ecosystem. They represented a fundamental shift that could make their existing infrastructure and expertise obsolete. So when GM took notice of the ZV mandate, it wasn't out of a newfound passion for green technology. It was about compliance. It was about regulation. It was about protecting their market share in the largest car market in the United States. Faced with this mandate, GM had a choice to make. They could do the bare minimum, create a token compliance car that nobody would want to buy just to check a box. Or they could pour their immense engineering resources into creating something truly revolutionary. The executives at GM, perhaps surprisingly, chose the latter. They saw an opportunity not just to comply but to lead. They decided to build the world's first modern, mass-produced electric car from a major manufacturer. This decision kicked off one of the most fascinating and controversial chapters in automotive history. A project was born within the secretive walls of GM's design and engineering departments. It wasn't a modified gasoline car with batteries stuffed in the trunk. This was going to be a purpose-built electric vehicle, designed from the ground up to be efficient, aerodynamic, and futuristic. The goal was to prove that an electric car could be more than just a glorified golf cart. It could be desirable. It could be the future. This secret project would eventually become the legendary GM EV1. The team assembled was a collection of brilliant, passionate engineers and designers, true believers who saw this as more than just a job. They were on a mission to change the world. They were given a surprising amount of freedom to innovate. to push the boundaries of what was thought possible with battery technology, aerodynamics, and lightweight materials. The design of the car itself was straight out of a science fiction movie. It had an incredibly low drag coefficient, meaning it sliced through the air with minimal resistance, a crucial factor for maximizing range. It was a two-seater with a teardrop shape, made from lightweight composites and aluminum. Everything about it screamed, "The future is now." It was a radical departure from anything else on the road, and it was a statement. GM was showing the world and CARB that they were taking this challenge seriously. But building a prototype is one thing. Building a car that could be safely and reliably driven by the public is another challenge entirely. The team had to solve immense technical hurdles. The biggest, of course, was the battery. In the early 90s, lithium-ion batteries, the standard for today's EVs, were not yet viable for automotive use. The first EV1 South would have to rely on heavy lead-acid battery packs. This was a huge compromise, limiting the car's range and performance. Despite this, the engineers worked miracles, squeezing every possible mile out of the available technology. As development progressed, the car started to generate buzz. The idea that a giant like GM was creating a real, honest-to-goodness electric car was captivating. It represented a potential turning point, a moment where the industry leader was finally embracing the future instead of fighting it. The stage was set for the car's debut. California was waiting, the world was watching, and a small group of enthusiastic early adopters were about to get their hands on a vehicle that would become an icon. But as we'll see, the story of the EV1 is not a simple tale of technological triumph. It's a complex narrative filled with corporate politics, technological limitations, and a public that wasn't quite ready for a revolution. The same company that birthed this incredible machine would also be the one to kill it. Why did GM pour hundreds of millions of dollars into a car only to take it back and crush it? That's the question we'll start to unpack in our next chapter. The birth of the EV1 was a direct result of government regulation, but its fate would be decided by forces far more complex. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to the 90s. It's a crucial decade for understanding where we are today with electric vehicles. If you found this interesting, please hit that like button, and make sure you resubscribed with notifications turned on so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did you remember the buzz around the GM mandate? We'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our deep dive into the fascinating history of the electric car. Last time, we explored the early sparks of innovation that flickered throughout the 20th century. Today, we're jumping forward to a moment that truly felt like the future had arrived. We're in Chapter 3, The Birth of the Impact. The year is 1990. The place? The Los Angeles Auto Show, a stage where dreams are often unveiled on four wheels. General Motors, one of the titans of the automotive world, pulls the cover off a concept car that doesn't just turn heads, it snaps them. It was called the Yimpact, and what an impact it made. Imagine the scene. The hall is buzzing with the usual mix of chrome, horsepower, and gasoline-fueled excitement. Then, this thing rolls out. It was sleek, almost like a teardrop sculpted by the wind. It didn't have the aggressive grills or boxy shapes common at the time. Instead, it was smooth, low-slung, and unapologetically futuristic. The design was so advanced, so aerodynamically pure, that it looked less like a car from 1990 and more like a vehicle that had time-traveled from 2020. The crowd was stunned. This wasn't just another concept car destined to be forgotten. It was a statement. The Impact's body was made from lightweight composite materials, and its shape was obsessed with cheating the wind. It had a drag coefficient that was astonishingly low, even by today's standards. This wasn't just for looks. Every curve, every smooth panel was designed for maximum efficiency. It was a masterclass in aerodynamics. When people saw it, they didn't see a quirky experiment. They saw a viable, exciting vision of what a car could be. It was clean, it was quiet, and it was cool. But the real revolution was under the skin. This car wasn't powered by pistons and explosions. It was moved by electrons. It was a fully electric vehicle, but unlike the glorified golf carts of the past, the Impact promised real-world performance. It could accelerate quickly and reach highway speeds, all without a single puff of exhaust. For the public, and even for many within the industry, this was a revelation. It challenged the long-held belief that electric cars had to be slow, clunky, and impractical. The buzz at the LA Auto Show was immense. The media went wild. Was this for real? Could a major manufacturer like GM actually be serious about building something like this? The public response was overwhelmingly positive. People were genuinely excited by the prospect of a car that was both thrilling to look at and environmentally friendly. The California Air Resources Board, or CARB, was paying close attention. The positive reception for the impact helped embolden them to push for stricter emissions regulations, which would soon ripple through the entire industry. What started as a design exercise, a way to showcase GM's engineering prowess, was rapidly becoming something more. The impact wasn't just a car, it was a catalyst. It planted a seed in the minds of engineers, executives, regulators, and the public. It showed that the electric car wasn't a relic of the past, but a tangible possibility for the future. This single stunning concept car, born from a desire to push boundaries, set in motion a chain of events that no one could have fully predicted. The overwhelming success and public adoration for the impact convinced some key people at GM that this was an idea worth pursuing. They had captured lightning in a bottle. The question now was, what would they do with it? This futuristic dream car, this impact, would soon evolve, shedding its concept name to become something legendary, something that would both inspire a generation and become a source of major controversy. It was the direct ancestor, the blueprint, for what would later be known as the EV1. And that's where the story really gets interesting. The journey from the auto show floor to the open road is a long and winding one, filled with technological breakthroughs, corporate politics, and passionate individuals. The impact had shown what was possible, but turning that possibility into a reality would be the next great challenge. Thank you so much for joining me on this chapter of our journey. The story of the EV1 is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what comes next. If you enjoyed this video and want to follow the story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious. Welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into Chapter 4, Designing the Future. This is where the dream of the GM Impact concept car starts to become a tangible reality, a car you could actually see on the road. The challenge was immense. How do you take a futuristic show car and turn it into a reliable, mass-produced vehicle without losing its soul? GM's engineers and designers were about to embark on one of the most ambitious projects in automotive history. They weren't just building a new car. They were creating a new category of vehicle. The pressure was on. Every decision, from the materials used to the shape of the side mirrors, would be scrutinized. The goal wasn't just to build an electric car, but to build the best electric car the world had ever seen. The first thing anyone noticed about what would become the EV1 was its shape. It looked like nothing else on the road. It wasn't a sedan, it wasn't a coupe in the traditional sense. It was a teardrop on wheels, a smooth, almost liquid form that seemed to have been sculpted by the wind itself. This wasn't just for looks. This was pure, unadulterated function driving form. The team was obsessed with one thing above all else: aerodynamics. They knew that in the world of electric vehicles, where every watt of energy is precious, the biggest enemy is air resistance. The more air you have to push out of the way, the more power you use, and the shorter your range. So they set an audacious goal to create the most aerodynamic production car ever made. They spent countless hours in the wind tunnel, refining every single surface. The gentle slope of the hood, the flush-mounted windows, the curved underbody, and even the partially covered rear wheels. Every detail was meticulously engineered to help the car slice through the air with minimal effort. This wasn't just about making the car look futuristic. It was about survival. It was about squeezing every last possible mile out of the battery pack. The result of this obsession was a drag coefficient of just 0.19. To put that in perspective, even today, most modern aerodynamically efficient cars struggle to get below 0.25. The EV1 was decades ahead of its time. It was so slippery that it felt like it could coast for miles. Every curve truly had a purpose. It was a rolling testament to the power of design when it's focused on a single, critical mission. To achieve this incredible aerodynamic efficiency and keep the weight down, the team had to rethink the very materials a car is made from. Steel, the traditional backbone of the auto industry, was too heavy. So, they turned to the world of aerospace and racing for inspiration. The main structure of the EV1 was a rigid, lightweight aluminum space frame. This provided the necessary strength and safety without the weight penalty of steel. But they didn't stop there. The body panels weren't metal at all. They were made from advanced, lightweight composite plastics. This not only helped reduce weight further, but also gave the car an incredible resistance to dents and dings. You could literally push on a fender, and it would pop right back into shape. It was a car built with materials from the future. The obsession with efficiency extended to every component. The tires were specially designed by Michelin. They were narrow, inflated to a high pressure, and made with a unique low rolling resistance rubber compound. This meant less friction with the road, which, you guessed it, meant more range. Even the glass was special, a solar reflective material that helped keep the cabin cool, reducing the need to run the power-hungry air conditioning system. Inside, the car continued its futuristic theme. The dashboard was a clean digital display. There were no traditional gauges, just crisp electronic readouts providing the driver with all the essential information. The controls were unique too, with a keypad for starting the car and selecting gears. It felt less like getting into a car and more like stepping into a personal shuttlecraft from a science fiction movie. But beneath all this futuristic design and advanced material science was a very real-world challenge. How do you manufacture a car like this? The aluminum space frame couldn't be welded like steel. It required a complex process of bonding and riveting. The plastic body panels needed new painting techniques. The entire assembly line had to be rethought. GM invested heavily in a new dedicated manufacturing facility in Lansing, Michigan. It was a state-of-the-art plant, more like a clean room laboratory than a traditional car factory. The workers who built the EV1 were a hand-picked, highly skilled team. They knew they weren't just assembling cars. They were building a piece of history. This painstaking process of turning the impact concept into the production EV1 was a monumental achievement of engineering and design. It was a car where every single component was re-evaluated and optimized for a single purpose: efficiency. It was a holistic design where the powertrain, the body, the tires, and even the interior worked in perfect harmony. The EV1 wasn't just a car. It was a statement. It was GM showing the world what was possible when a company puts its full resources behind a bold new idea. It was a glimpse of a different kind of automotive future, one that was quiet, clean, and incredibly efficient. The design was so radical, so focused, that it both inspired and intimidated. It was a marvel of technology, but its otherworldly appearance also made it feel a bit distant, a bit alien to the average car buyer. This would prove to be both its greatest strength and one of its biggest challenges as it finally prepared to meet the public. Thank you so much for watching. We're getting closer to the moment this car actually hits the road, so be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible story. See you in the next one. Welcome back to our series on the GM EV1. Last time, we talked about the incredible excitement and hope surrounding this futuristic car. But every revolutionary piece of tech has its hurdles, and for the EV1, the biggest one was stored right under the floorboards. Today we're diving into Chapter 5, the battery problem. Picture this, it's the 1990s. The most advanced battery you probably own is in your Walkman, or maybe a chunky cell phone that can barely last a day. Now, imagine trying to power a whole car with that level of technology. That was the monumental challenge facing the engineers at General Motors. Building an electric car wasn't just about designing a cool aerodynamic body or a powerful motor. It was about solving the fundamental energy puzzle. How do you store enough electricity to make a car practical for everyday life? The heart of any electric vehicle is its battery, and back then the options were, well, limited. The most reliable and understood battery technology at the time was the good old lead-acid battery. Yes, the same basic tech that had been starting gasoline cars for decades. It was heavy, it was bulky, and its energy density, the amount of power you can pack into a certain weight, was laughably low compared to today's standards. So the first generation EV1 rolled out of the factory with a massive T-shaped lead-acid battery pack that weighed over 1,100 pounds. All that weight, all that engineering, and what did it get you? A real-world range of about 70 to 90 miles on a good day, with the wind at your back. Think about that. A trip from Los Angeles to San Diego was out of the question without a lengthy recharge. Even a simple daily commute could trigger range anxiety if you hit unexpected traffic or needed to run an extra errand. For the early adopters, this was a compromise they were willing to make. They were pioneers after all. They installed special 220-volt chargers in their garages, which could juice up the car in about 3 hours, much faster than a standard wall outlet. But still a far cry from a 5-minute gas station fill-up. They meticulously planned their routes, becoming masters of their local geography, knowing exactly how far they could push the limit before needing to head home. But GM knew that for the EV1 to ever break into the mainstream, 70 miles just wasn't going to cut it. The public wasn't just buying a car. They were buying freedom and spontaneity. The lead-acid battery was a technological leash, tethering the EV1 to its charging post. The search for a better solution was on, and it was a race against time, public perception, and the laws of chemistry themselves. The engineers didn't have to look far for the next step up. A new contender was emerging in the world of consumer electronics, the nickel-metal hydride battery, or NIMH for short. You might remember these from early digital cameras or high-powered flashlights. They were a significant improvement over lead-acid. They were lighter, could hold more energy for their size, and didn't suffer from the memory effect that plagued older rechargeable batteries. So, for the second generation of the EV1, produced in 1999, GM made the switch. They partnered with a company called Ovonics to develop a NIMH battery pack specifically for the car. The results were instantly noticeable. The new battery pack was not only lighter, but it also boosted the EV1's range significantly. Suddenly, that 70-mile leash was extended to around 120 miles. And some hypermiling drivers even reported pushing it closer to 140 miles under ideal conditions. This was a huge leap forward. A 120-mile range opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Longer commutes, weekend trips, and a general feeling of freedom were now much more achievable. It felt like the EV1 was finally on the cusp of becoming the practical, everyday car it was always meant to be. The drivers who got to experience the NIMH version raved about the improvement. It was a game-changer. But even with this upgrade, the EV1 was still facing an uphill battle. While 120 miles was a great improvement, it was still less than half the range of a typical gasoline car. And the cost of these advanced NIMH batteries was astronomical, making the car incredibly expensive to produce. Furthermore, another battery technology was quietly being developed in labs, one that would eventually power the entire modern AV revolution: lithium-ion. At the time, lithium-ion was still considered experimental, volatile, and far too expensive for automotive use. The technology just wasn't mature enough yet. So the EV1 was caught in a difficult moment in history. It was too advanced for the limitations of lead-acid, but just a little too early for the lithium-ion breakthrough that was right around the corner. The battery problem highlights the core dilemma of the EV1. It was a car from the future, trapped by the technology of the present. GM had created a brilliant machine, but they were dependent on a battery industry that was struggling to keep up. This constant struggle for more range and less cost would ultimately play a huge role in the car's final, controversial fate. Next time, we'll explore the culture that sprung up around the EV1, the passionate community of drivers who fell in love with the car, and the powerful forces that were beginning to align against it. It's a story you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this deep dive into automotive history, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. See you then. Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're diving into what can only be described as a silent revolution. We've talked about the engineering, the politics, and the promise, but now we're getting behind the wheel. Let's explore the surreal, almost magical experience of actually driving the General Motors EV1. Imagine this. You slide into the driver's seat, a cockpit that looks and feels like it was lifted straight from a sci-fi movie. The dashboard is a sleek digital display, a stark contrast to the analog gauges of the era. You turn the key, but there's no roar of an engine, no rumble, no vibration. There's just silence, a profound, almost unnerving quiet. For a moment, you might even think the car is broken. But then, you press the accelerator. And that's when everything changes. The car doesn't just move. It glides. It flows forward with an effortless, liquid grace. The only sounds are the faint whisper of the tires on the pavement and the rush of wind over its teardrop-shaped body. It was a sensation so new, so different, that drivers struggled to find the words for it. Many of them settled on the same description. It felt like piloting a spaceship. You weren't just driving a car. You were part of the future. The EV1 didn't have gears. Acceleration was a single, seamless, uninterrupted wave of motion. From a standstill, the instant torque pushed you back into your seat with a surprising, silent force. It was like being launched by an invisible hand. Cruising on the highway felt like floating. The world outside the windows seemed to stream by in a silent movie, detached from the serene bubble you occupied. Drivers would often recount the reactions of others. Pulling up to a stoplight, pedestrians would do a double take, their heads whipping around as this futuristic pod silently appeared beside them. Other drivers would roll down their windows, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe, trying to understand where the engine noise was. What asterisk is asterisk that thing? Was a common question shouted across lanes of traffic. EV1 owners felt like ambassadors from another time, offering a glimpse into a world that was yet to come. This wasn't just transportation, it was an event. Every drive was a demonstration of a new possibility. The connection between driver and machine felt different, more intimate. Without the constant chatter of an internal combustion engine, you became more attuned to the car's subtle cues, the hum of the electric motor, the feel of the road through the chassis. It was a more mindful, more present way of driving. This experience created an incredibly passionate community of owners. They weren't just leasing a vehicle. They were adopting a new way of life. They would share stories of their silent commutes, of the wonder in their children's eyes, of the feeling of leaving a gas station behind for good. They organized meets, shared charging tips, and became evangelists for this quiet technology. They knew they were part of something special, a secret club that had experienced the future firsthand. The car's design enhanced this otherworldly feeling. Its low-slung, aerodynamic profile wasn't just for efficiency. It made the car look like it was perpetually in motion, even when parked. The covered rear wheel wells, the smooth underbody, the curved glass, every element was designed to slip through the air with minimal resistance. This wasn't just engineering. It was art. The car didn't just perform differently. It looked and felt like nothing else on the road. Driving the EV1 fundamentally altered your perception of what a car could be. The daily ritual of turning a key to ignite a series of controlled explosions suddenly seemed archaic, almost primitive. The noise, the vibration, the exhaust fumes, all things we had accepted as normal parts of driving, were suddenly absent. And in their absence, you realized they were never necessary in the first place. It was a profound revelation. It was like tasting color after a lifetime of seeing in black and white. Owners reported feeling a sense of responsibility. They understood the significance of what they were driving. They would patiently answer endless questions from curious onlookers at the grocery store or in parking lots. They were living proof that a different path was possible, a cleaner, quieter, and in many ways more exciting path. They weren't just driving a car. They were driving an idea. A smoothness was another key aspect. Because there were no gear shifts, no pistons firing, the power delivery was perfectly linear. Whether you were accelerating gently from a stop sign or merging onto a busy freeway, the experience was consistently, beautifully smooth. It redefined comfort. Long drives became less fatiguing without the constant low-frequency drone and vibration of a conventional engine. You arrived at your destination feeling more relaxed, more refreshed. Think about the psychological impact. For decades, power and performance in the automotive world were synonymous with loud, roaring engines. The EV1 completely flipped that script. It proved that you could have thrilling acceleration and whisper-quiet operation in the same package. It was performance without the noise pollution. It was progress you could feel, but barely hear. This silent revolution wasn't just happening on the streets of California and Arizona. This chapter in automotive history, though brief, was incredibly powerful. The experience of gliding silently through a world of noisy, vibrating machines left an indelible mark on those who lived it. It wasn't just a car. It was a paradigm shift on wheels. Thanks so much for watching and joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories like this. We'll see you in the next chapter. Have you ever heard of the GM EV1? For a brief shining moment in the late 90s, it felt like the future had arrived. It was sleek, silent, and fully electric. People who drove it loved it. But there was a catch, a crucial detail that would eventually seal its fate and turn its story into a modern legend. This is the story of a lease, not a purchase. Right from the start, General Motors made a very specific and ultimately fateful decision. You couldn't buy an EV1, not for any price. If you wanted to get behind the wheel of this revolutionary vehicle, you had to lease it. This program was limited, available only to residents of California and Arizona. Think about that for a second. The most advanced car on the road, a glimpse into a cleaner, quieter world, and you could only ever be its temporary guardian. This wasn't like leasing a normal car, where you have the option to buy it at the end of the term. The EV1 lease was a closed loop. When your time was up, the car went back to GM. Period. At the time, for the excited drivers who were just thrilled to be part of the electric revolution, this seemed like a minor detail. They were pioneers, early adopters experiencing something brand new. The leasing process itself was rigorous. You had to go through a pre-qualification process, almost like an interview, to prove you were the right kind of driver for this new kind of car. GM wanted to ensure the cars went to people who had the right driving habits, a place to install the charger, and lived in a suitable climate. It all felt very exclusive, very special. The people who got the keys became more than just drivers. They became evangelists. They were a passionate, tight-knit community. They held meets, they shared stories, they showed off their silent, futuristic cars to anyone who would listen. Celebrities like Tom Hanks and Mel Gibson were among the early lessees, adding a layer of Hollywood glamour to the EV1's image. These drivers loved their cars with a fervor you rarely see. They loved the instant acceleration, the quiet ride, and the fact that they never had to visit a gas station again. They felt like they were part of something important, a movement that was changing the world for the better. They washed their cars with care, they planned their routes to maximize range, and they treated these vehicles not just as transportation, but as a piece of the future they were privileged to hold. But here's the rub. They never truly owned them. They were caretakers, not owners. Every monthly payment was a reminder that their time with this incredible machine was finite. They were pouring their passion, their identity, and their hopes into something that legally, contractually, belonged entirely to GM. This fundamental fact that these beloved cars were only on loan was a seed of conflict, quietly dormant under all the initial excitement. As the first 3-year lease terms began to approach their end, a sense of unease started to ripple through the EV1 community. Drivers started asking the natural question, "What's next? Can I renew my lease? Can I please buy my car?" They had formed a deep emotional bond with their vehicles. These weren't just anonymous appliances. They were partners in a futuristic adventure. Many drivers had even invested their own money in home charging infrastructure. The idea of giving the car back was unthinkable, like being asked to return a beloved family pet, and this is where the story takes a dark turn. GM's answer was a firm, unwavering no. No renewals. No purchases. The program was ending, and all cars had to be returned. The dream was over. The drivers were stunned. They had been the car's biggest champions, its most visible and vocal supporters. They had done everything GM asked of them and more. And now, the company was pulling the plug, not just on the program, but on their personal connection to the vehicle. Imagine the betrayal they felt. They had proven that electric cars worked. They had shown that a market, albeit a niche one, existed and was passionate. Yet GM's decision seemed to ignore all of that. The company cited a lack of profitability and limited market demand as reasons for discontinuing the program. They argued that the EV1 was more of a real-world engineering evaluation than a commercially viable product. From a cold corporate perspective, it was an experiment that had run its course. The data was collected, and it was time to move on. But for the drivers, this wasn't a spreadsheet. This was their car. The lease-only policy, once a curious quirk, now revealed itself as the company's ultimate escape hatch. It gave GM the total, absolute power to end the entire project on their terms, without any resistance from a base of owners. If the cars had been sold, there would be a fleet of privately owned EV1s still on the road, a living testament to the technology. But because they were all leased, GM held all the cards. They could recall every single one. This decision sparked a rebellion. The passionate community of drivers transformed into a group of determined activists. They organized protests, they held vigils. They pooled their money to try and make GM an offer. One group famously offered GM over $1 million for the remaining cars. The answer was still no. The company began the process of repossessing the vehicles as leases expired. Some drivers refused to give them up, leading to tense standoffs. There are stories of people hiding their EV1s in their garages, blocking them in with other cars, anything to delay the inevitable. The climax of this tragedy was what happened next. GM didn't put the returned EV1s in a museum. They didn't sell them to other companies or universities for research. With a few exceptions that were deactivated and given to museums, GM systematically collected the vast majority of the nearly 800 remaining EV1s, transported them to a remote desert facility, and crushed them. The images of these futuristic, perfectly functional cars being flattened into scrap metal are heartbreaking. It became the defining image of the controversy. Why would a company destroy its own groundbreaking creation? This act turned the EV1 into a martyr for the electric vehicle movement. It fueled conspiracy theories and created a powerful narrative that a powerful corporation, perhaps in collusion with Big Oil, had deliberately killed the electric car. The lease-only strategy was the mechanism that made it possible. It was the perfect legally sound way for GM to retain complete control and wipe the slate clean when they decided the project was no longer in their interest. Looking back, the EV1 story is a powerful lesson. It shows the incredible passion that new technology can inspire, but it also serves as a stark warning about corporate control and the difference between using something and truly owning it. The drivers of the EV1 were pioneers who proved the viability of electric cars long before they became mainstream. Their love for a car they could never own and their fight to save it lit a fire. The controversy surrounding the EV1's demise put a spotlight on the potential of electric vehicles and left a lingering question in the public consciousness. What if? That question, born from a simple lease agreement, helped pave the way for the electric car revolution we are seeing today. The EV1 may be gone, but its ghost, and the story of its passionate but temporary drivers continues to haunt and inspire the auto industry. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of technology and innovation. Let me know in the comments what you think. Was GM justified, or was this one of the biggest corporate blunders of all time? See you in the next one. You know, some cars are just cars. They get you from point A to point B, but every once in a while, a car comes along that's different. It's not just a machine. It's a movement. So GM built this groundbreaking electric car, but they didn't just sell it. They leased it. And this created a really unique situation. The people who drove the EV1 weren't just customers. They were pioneers, a select group of individuals who got to experience the future first. And almost immediately, something incredible began to happen. A community formed. This wasn't your typical car club, meeting up on weekends to show off chrome engines. This was different. F1 drivers were bound by a shared experience, a shared belief. They would see another EV1 on the road, a rare sight, mind you, and it was an instant connection. They'd flash their lights, wave, pull over to chat. They were part of an exclusive club, united by this silent, sleek, teardrop-shaped car. They shared tips on how to maximize range, where to find public charging stations, which were few and far between back then. They organized meets, created websites, and shared stories. It was a grassroots movement, born out of pure passion for this vehicle. They felt like they were on the front lines of a revolution, and in many ways, the EV1 wasn't just a car to them. It was a symbol of progress, a tangible piece of a better, cleaner future. And then Hollywood got involved. When you have something revolutionary, celebrities are often the first to take notice. The EV1, with its futuristic design and eco-friendly credentials, was practically tailor-made for the Hollywood elite who wanted to make a statement. And make a statement they did. One of the most vocal and visible advocates was Tom Hanks. He loved his EV1. He would talk about it in interviews, explaining how amazing it was to drive a car that didn't need gasoline and didn't pollute the air. He wasn't paid to do this. He was just a genuine fan. He'd drive it to movie premieres, and the image of America's most beloved actor stepping out of this spaceship-like car on the red carpet was incredibly powerful. It gave the EV1 a level of coolness and legitimacy that no marketing budget could buy. But it wasn't just Tom Hanks. A whole constellation of stars joined the EV1 family. People like Mel Gibson, Danny DeVito, and Alexander Paul from Baywatch were all proud lessees. They saw the EV1 as more than just a cool gadget. They saw it as a way to use their platform to promote a cause they believed in, a transition away from fossil fuels. Imagine you're driving down the street in the late 90s. And you see a car that looks like it's from the year 2050. Then, the door opens and out steps a major movie star. It was surreal. These celebrity endorsements weren't just a fun fact. They were crucial. They turned the EV1 from a niche engineering project into a cultural icon. It became a status symbol, but not a symbol of wealth in the traditional sense. It was a symbol of being forward-thinking, environmentally conscious, and part of the solution. The media coverage was immense. Magazines and TV shows were fascinated. Here was this car of the future, driven by the stars of today. It created a powerful narrative. If the people who could afford any car in the world were choosing this quirky little electric two-seater, there must be something truly special about it. And there was. For the drivers, both famous and not, the EV1 was so much more than transportation. Owning one was an active declaration of their values. In a world grappling with pollution, oil dependency, and climate change, driving an EV1 was an act of hope. Think about it. Every time they got behind the wheel, they were making a choice. They chose silence over the roar of a combustion engine. They chose zero emissions over a cloud of exhaust. It was a daily commitment to a different kind of world. It was a statement that said, we can do better. The technology is here. We don't have to be stuck in the past. This wasn't just about saving a few bucks on gas. For many, it was a deeply personal, almost moral decision. The EV1 connected with people on an emotional level. They named their cars. They talked about them as if they were members of the family. The car wasn't just a possession. It was a partner in their personal mission to live more sustainably. This deep emotional bond is what truly defines the cult of the EV1, when you have people who are not just satisfied with a product but are willing to become its evangelists. You've created something far beyond a simple commodity. You've created a legend. The community forums were filled with testimonials. People would describe the EV1 smile, the grin that would spread across someone's face the first time they experienced that instant, silent acceleration. They talked about the peace of driving without engine noise, hearing only the whisper of the wind and the tires on the road. It was a transformative experience. This passionate advocacy and the deep sense of community were a double-edged sword for General Motors. On one hand, they had created a product so beloved that its users did their marketing for them. The word of mouth was overwhelmingly positive. On the other hand, this fierce loyalty would soon turn into fierce opposition. Because, as we'll see in the chapters to come, the story of the EV1 doesn't have a simple, happy ending. This love affair between a car and its drivers was destined for heartbreak. The very passion that made the EV1 community so strong would be the same passion that would fuel the fight to save it. The cult of the EV1 was a testament to the power of a great idea. It showed that people were ready, willing, and excited to embrace a cleaner automotive future. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about the hope and the vision that the car represented. These weren't just drivers. They were believers. And their belief in the EV1 would immortalize it, long after the last one disappeared from the road. That's all for this chapter. The story is about to take a dramatic turn, so you won't want to miss what happens next. Thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this series, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you get notified when we release the next chapter. See you then. Welcome back to our series on the rise and fall of the GM EV1. In our last chapter, we saw how a dedicated community of drivers fell head over heels for this revolutionary electric car. They loved its silence, its speed, and its vision of a cleaner future. It seemed like the start of something incredible. But while the drivers were celebrating, a storm was brewing inside the halls of General Motors. This is Chapter 9, Corporate Doubt and Fear. For the passionate engineers and the loyal lessees, the EV1 was more than just a car. It was a movement. However, for the executives crunching the numbers back in Detroit, the picture looked very, very different. The love from the drivers, while heartwarming, couldn't mask a glaring, uncomfortable truth. The EV1 was a financial black hole. Let's break down the economics. Each EV1 was a marvel of engineering, packed with cutting-edge technology for the time. Custom-designed chassis, advanced battery systems, lightweight materials, none of it came cheap. Estimates vary, but it is widely believed that each car cost GM somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 to produce. Now, contrast that with the lease price. Drivers were paying a few $100s a month. Do the math, and it's clear GM was losing a staggering amount of money on every single EV1 that rolled off the assembly line. This wasn't a sustainable business model, and the executives knew it. The project, which started with so much fanfare and promise, was now being viewed through a lens of pure profit and loss. And from that perspective, it was a failure. The red ink on the balance sheets began to drown out the positive press and the happy testimonials from drivers. The question echoing in the boardrooms was no longer, how can we make this succeed? But rather, how much is this experiment costing us? This financial pressure began to fundamentally shift the internal perception of the EV1. For many within the corporate structure, particularly in the finance and traditional sales departments, the car was never seen as the future of the company. Instead, it was labeled a compliance car. What does that mean? It means they saw the EV1 primarily as a tool to meet government regulations, specifically California's zero-emission vehicle mandate. Think of it like this: it was a box that needed to be checked. The mandate required major automakers to produce and offer for sale a certain percentage of zero-emission vehicles. For some at GM, the EV1 was simply their answer to that requirement, a costly but necessary nuisance to continue doing business in the lucrative California market. It wasn't a genuine, heartfelt effort to pivot the entire company toward an electric future. It was a strategic move to satisfy regulators, an expensive science project that was never intended to become a core part of their business. This compliance car mentality was toxic to the program's long-term survival. When you see a project as an obligation rather than an opportunity, you're not invested in its growth. You're just waiting for the obligation to end. This mindset explains why there was little effort to market the EV1 to a broader audience. It explains why production numbers were kept so low. Why would you pour massive resources into something you fundamentally believe is a dead end, a temporary measure to appease lawmakers? The contrast was stark. On one side, you had the EV1 team and the drivers, who saw a glimpse of a better, cleaner, and exciting automotive future. They were the true believers. On the other side, you had a powerful contingent of executives and managers who saw a compliance-driven money pit. They were the pragmatists, or perhaps the pessimists, whose worldview was shaped by decades of selling internal combustion engine vehicles. For them, the real money was in trucks and SUVs, not in these quirky two-seater electric pods. This internal conflict created a deep-seated fear within GM. What if this electric thing actually took off? It would mean retooling entire factories, retraining a massive workforce, and disrupting a century-old supply chain built around gasoline engines. It would mean cannibalizing their own profitable products. The success of the EV1, paradoxically, represented a threat to the established order. It was easier and safer to view it as a niche experiment that had served its purpose. So, while the outside world saw smiling drivers and futuristic cars, the internal reality at GM was one of anxiety and doubt. The bean counters saw mounting losses. The old guard saw a threat to their gasoline-powered empire, and the strategists saw a compliance box that had been ticked. The love from the drivers was real, but it was no match for the corporate fear that was beginning to take hold. The stage was being set for a drastic and ultimately heartbreaking decision. The question was no longer asterisk if asterisk GM would pull the plug, but asterisk when asterisk. Join us in the next chapter as we explore the final act of this tragedy, where corporate fear solidifies into a fateful decision that would send shockwaves through the automotive world and create a legacy that haunts GM to this day. What do you think? Was GM justified in its financial concerns, or did they miss the biggest opportunity in a century? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button. And be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the dramatic conclusion to the EV1 saga. We'll see you in the next video. Hello, and welcome back to our series on the rise and fall of the GM EV1. In our last chapter, we saw a community rally around this revolutionary car, a beacon of a clean energy future. But as the saying goes, the brighter the light, the darker the shadow. Today, in Chapter 10, we're diving into the powerful forces that began to push back, threatening to extinguish the EV1's flame for good. The success and growing popularity of the EV1 didn't go unnoticed. It was more than just a car. It was a symbol of a paradigm shift, a move away from fossil fuels. And for some of the world's most powerful industries, this was not just an inconvenience, it was a direct threat to their very existence. The oil and traditional auto industries, giants with deep pockets and immense political influence, began to stir. They saw the EV1 not as progress, but as a problem that needed to be solved. The battleground was set, and the first major skirmish took place in the heart of the movement, California. Remember the zero-emission vehicle mandate? The very legislation that forced automakers to produce cars like the EV1 in the first place? It became the primary target. An organized and well-funded lobbying effort was launched, aimed squarely at dismantling this crucial piece of environmental policy. Think about it. Billions, if not trillions, of dollars were at stake. For decades, the entire global economy had been built on a foundation of oil extraction, refinement, and consumption. The internal combustion engine was its beating heart. The EV1 represented a future where that entire infrastructure could become obsolete. For the oil lobby, every EV1 on the road was a customer lost forever. For traditional automakers who had perfected the internal combustion engine over a century, the EV1 represented a disruptive technology that would require a complete overhaul of their factories, supply chains, and business models. It was cheaper and easier to fight the change than to embrace it. So, how did they fight it? Not with innovation, but with influence. They descended upon Sacramento, California's capital, with an army of lobbyists. These were professional persuaders, armed with arguments designed to sow doubt and fear. They presented studies often funded by the industries themselves, questioning the viability of electric vehicles. They argued that the technology was immature, that the batteries were impractical, and that consumers didn't really want these cars. They painted a picture of economic doom, suggesting that the ZV mandate would cripple the auto industry, leading to job losses and economic decline. They framed it as government overreach, an unfair burden placed upon businesses. They ran sophisticated public relations campaigns, creating front groups with friendly-sounding names like Californians Against Government, XS. These groups published op-eds and ran ads that made it seem like everyday citizens, not corporate giants, were the ones opposed to the mandate. It was a classic playbook: create a narrative of grassroots opposition to mask a top-down corporate agenda. The message was relentless and pervasive. They argued that forcing a transition to EVs was premature. They claimed the market should decide, conveniently ignoring the fact that they were actively working to poison that market against the new technology. They whispered in the ears of politicians, reminding them of campaign contributions and the economic power they wielded. The pressure was immense, coming from all sides, designed to wear down the resolve of the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, the very body that had championed the mandate. For the passionate owners and advocates of the EV1, this was a David versus Goliath scenario. They had seen the future, they had driven it, and they knew it worked. They organized rallies, wrote letters, and testified at hearings. They were a grassroots movement fueled by genuine belief and first-hand experience. They brought their EV1s to the steps of the Capitol, silent, clean machines that stood in stark contrast to the noisy, polluting status quo. But they were up against an opponent with virtually unlimited resources. While EV1 drivers were taking time off work and spending their own money to fight for their cause, the oil and auto lobbies had full-time professionals whose only job was to defeat the mandate. The sheer scale of the opposition was staggering. It wasn't just a debate about policy anymore. It was an all-out war for the future of transportation. The arguments of the lobbyists began to find fertile ground. Some politicians, perhaps wary of taking on such powerful industries or genuinely persuaded by the economic arguments, started to waver. The once solid support for the ZV mandate began to show cracks. The narrative shifted from, "When will we have clean cars?" to, "Are clean cars even possible?" It was a masterful campaign of doubt. This coordinated pushback created a powerful headwind against the EV1 movement. The optimism and excitement that had surrounded the car's launch began to be overshadowed by a sense of impending doom. The very real threat was that if the ZEV mandate was weakened or repealed, the legal justification for the EV1's existence would vanish. Automakers like GM would no longer be required to produce them, and it was becoming increasingly clear that they had no desire to do so voluntarily. The EV1, a car that had been hailed as the savior of the modern city, was now being portrayed as a failed experiment, a government-mandated boondoggle that nobody wanted. The truth, of course, was far more complex. The people who had won loved it. The demand was there. But the story being told in the halls of power and in the media was a different one entirely, a story carefully crafted by those who had the most to lose from its success. The fight over the ZEV mandate was the critical turning point. It was the moment the hidden war against the electric car came out into the open. The EV1 wasn't just a car anymore. It was the symbol of a battle between the past and the future, between entrenched interests and disruptive innovation. The fate of this remarkable vehicle, and perhaps the immediate future of clean transportation, was now hanging in the balance, to be decided not on the open road, but in the closed-door meetings of Sacramento. The movement to protect the EV1 was now facing its strongest headwinds yet, and the storm was just beginning. What happened next would seal the fate of the EV1. Join us in our next chapter as we witness the outcome of this intense political battle and explore the heartbreaking consequences for the car and its drivers. This is a story you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and if you're finding this series insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll see you in the next one. Video opens possibly with archival footage of early EV1s on the road, then cuts to news clips of industry executives and politicians discussing regulations. Hello, and welcome back to our deep dive into the story of the electric car. In our last episode, we saw the birth of a revolution with GM's EV1. A car born from a bold mandate by the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. It was a promise of a cleaner future, a horizon filled with zero-emission vehicles. But promises, as we know, can be fragile. Today, we're exploring Chapter 11, CARB's weakening resolve. The initial ZV mandate was audacious. It required that by 1998, 2% of new cars sold by major automakers in California had to be zero-emission. By 2003, that number was supposed to jump to a full 10%. This was a direct challenge to the automotive industry's status quo, and the industry was not going to take it lying down. Almost immediately after the mandate was announced, the lobbying began. Automakers, oil companies, and their powerful allies descended upon Sacramento. They poured millions into campaigns, arguing that the mandate was technologically infeasible, economically disastrous, and an infringement on consumer choice. They painted a picture of a government forcing unproven, expensive, and impractical vehicles onto an unwilling public. Lawsuits were filed, challenging CARB's authority to set such standards. The legal battles were protracted and costly, creating a constant cloud of uncertainty over the ZV program. It was a war of attrition, and the constant pressure began to take its toll on the regulatory board. The political climate was shifting, and the initial gung-ho spirit for a radical environmental leap was starting to wane under the weight of this coordinated opposition. At the forefront of this pushback was none other than General Motors, the very company that had created the poster child for the GV mandate, the EV1. Publicly, GM celebrated the EV1 as a technological marvel. They ran ads showcasing its futuristic design and smooth, silent ride. But behind the closed doors of boardrooms and in legislative chambers, they were singing a very different tune. Their primary argument was that the technology, specifically the battery technology, simply wasn't ready for mass adoption. GM executives argued that the lead-acid batteries in the first generation, EV1 South, offered limited range, and that even the more advanced nickel-metal hydride batteries in the second generation were too expensive to produce on a large scale. They claimed that forcing them to sell these cars would lead to massive financial losses. In testimony and public statements, they framed the issue as one of practicality. They weren't against electric cars in principle, they argued, but the technology needed more time to mature organically, free from what they called an overreaching government mandate. This argument found a receptive audience. It sounded reasonable. After all, who wants to be forced to buy a product that isn't ready for prime time? But for the passionate drivers of the EV1, this narrative was infuriating. They were the living proof that the technology worked. They were happily driving their electric cars every day, commuting to work, running errands, and demonstrating that for a significant portion of the driving public, the EV1 was more than adequate. They saw GM's argument not as a statement of technological fact, but as a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you constantly tell the public and policymakers that a product isn't viable while simultaneously limiting its production and availability, it's easy to make that reality come true. The drivers organized. They held rallies, wrote letters, and provided their own testimony at CARB hearings, sharing their positive real-world experiences. They showed their electricity bills to prove how cheap the cars were to run. They talked about the joy of driving a silent, powerful vehicle that didn't pollute. They were a grassroots movement fighting a corporate giant, a David versus Goliath scenario playing out in the halls of power in California. But was their passion enough to counter the millions of dollars and immense political influence of the auto industry? The turning point, the moment the fate of the EV1 was truly sealed, came in 2003, after years of relentless lobbying, legal challenges, and a carefully orchestrated public relations campaign from the auto industry. CARB blinked. The board convened for a pivotal hearing to reconsider the ZEV mandate. The room was thick with tension. On one side, you had the automakers and their lawyers, armed with charts and projections of economic doom. On the other side, you had the EV1 drivers, environmental groups, and clean air advocates, making passionate pleas to hold the line for the sake of public health and the future of the planet. Despite the emotional testimony and the real-world evidence presented by EV drivers, CARB voted to significantly scale back the mandate. The new rules were a complex web of credits and allowances. Instead of requiring a set percentage of pure zero-emission vehicles, the revised mandate allowed automakers to meet their obligations by producing a smaller number of ZEVs, or by producing more partial zero-emission vehicles, like advanced gasoline cars or hybrids. In essence, it gave the automakers an out. The immediate, hard and fast requirement to produce and sell cars like the EV1 was gone. For GM, this was the green light they had been waiting for. With the legal requirement to produce ZEVs effectively neutered, there was no longer a business case, at least in their view, for continuing the EV1 program. The program had been an exercise in compliance, a response to a regulation. Once that regulation was weakened, the program became an expensive R&D project with no clear path to profitability on the horizon. The decision was swift. Shortly after CARB's ruling, GM announced it was officially terminating the EV1 program. The dream was over. The decision sent shockwaves through the community of EV enthusiasts and environmental advocates. It was a crushing defeat. They had seen the future, they had driven it, and now it was being taken away. The scaling back of the ZEV mandate wasn't just a regulatory tweak. It was the nail in the coffin for the first mass-produced electric car of the modern era. It demonstrated the immense power of incumbent industries to shape policy and to halt innovation that threatens their business model. The battle had been fought, and for now, the gasoline engine had won. But what would happen to the cars themselves? The EV1s weren't sold, they were leased. And with the program terminated, GM had a decision to make about the several hundred electric cars still in the hands of their devoted drivers. What came next would become one of the most controversial and heartbreaking chapters in automotive history. Join us next time as we uncover the tragic end of the EV1 and the legacy it left behind. Thank you so much for watching. If you're finding this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. We'll see you then. Welcome back to our series on the rise and fall of the GM EV1. Today, we're diving into Chapter 12, The Recall Nobody Wanted. It's a story of passion, protest, and a painful ending for what could have been the future of driving. Picture this. It's the early 2000s. The new millennium is here, full of promise. If you were one of the lucky few leasing a GM EV1, you were literally living in the future. You had this sleek, silent, zero-emissions car that turned heads everywhere you went. It was more than just a car. It was a statement. It was a commitment to a cleaner, better world. The drivers, a mix of celebrities, tech pioneers, and everyday environmentalists, formed a tight-knit community. They weren't just customers, they were evangelists for the electric dream. They loved their cars, and I mean truly loved them. Then the letter arrived. A formal notice from General Motors. It was a recall. But this wasn't your typical recall for a faulty part or a minor adjustment. No, this was a full-scale recall of every single EV1 on the road. GM was terminating the leases and wanted the cars back, all of them. The news hit the EV1 community like a shockwave. Why? The cars were running perfectly. Owners were more than happy with them. Many had even put their names on waiting lists, hoping to buy their leased cars outright when the term was up. The demand was there, the passion was there, so why was GM pulling the plug? The official reason given by GM was a mix of business and liability concerns. They claimed the program was unprofitable and that maintaining a small fleet of specialized vehicles, with a limited supply of service parts, was no longer feasible. They cited concerns about the long-term safety and repairability of the cars. To the drivers, these explanations felt thin, almost like excuses. It just didn't add up. They had a product people loved, a product that was ahead of its time, and they were choosing to kill it. This decision sparked an unprecedented reaction. The EV1 drivers didn't just sigh and hand over the keys. They fought back. They organized. They saw this as a betrayal, not just by a car company, but of a promise for a cleaner future. Protests began to pop up. Rallies were held. These weren't just angry customers. They were heartbroken advocates trying to save something they deeply believed in. One of the most famous protests took the form of a mock funeral for the electric car. People gathered, eulogies were read, and a deep sense of mourning filled the air. They weren't just mourning a car. They were mourning a lost opportunity, a future that was being snatched away. The resistance got even more personal. Some drivers, in an act of pure defiance, refused to let their cars go. When the tow trucks arrived to haul the EV1s away, some owners staged sit-ins, literally blocking the path. Imagine the scene: a passionate driver standing between their beloved futuristic car and the tow truck sent to take it to its doom. It was a powerful, visual symbol of their fight. Chelsea Sexton, a former GM employee who had been a huge advocate for the EV1 program, became a key figure in organizing the resistance, trying to rally public support and pressure GM to reverse its decision. Despite the protests, GM held firm. They began systematically collecting the cars, one by one. But the owners had one more question: what was going to happen to them? These were perfectly good functioning vehicles. Surely they would be resold or repurposed? GM's initial statements were vague but reassuring. They insisted they would recycle the cars. The word recycle sounded responsible, even environmentally friendly. It suggested the parts would be reused, that the spirit of the car would live on. Many hoped this meant the cars might be donated to universities for research or to museums as historical artifacts. Anything but the alternative, but soon the truth began to leak out. And the truth was far uglier than anyone had imagined. Recycle was a euphemism. Whistleblowers and investigative journalists started to uncover what was really happening behind the locked gates of GM's proving grounds in Arizona. The cars weren't being recycled. They weren't being preserved. They were being systematically crushed. Leaked photos and videos started to surface, and they were heartbreaking. Rows upon rows of pristine EV1s lined up in the desert sun, waiting for their turn in the crusher. The images were devastating. The very machines that represented a clean, quiet future were being violently mangled into worthless heaps of metal and plastic. It felt like a deliberate, almost vindictive act. The company wasn't just discontinuing a product. They were erasing it from existence. Why would they do this? Why not sell them? Or donate them? The theories are plentiful. Some believe GM was under immense pressure from the oil industry and other vested interests who saw the success of the EV1 as a direct threat to their business model. By destroying the cars, they weren't just ending a program. They were sending a message that the electric car was not a viable option. Another theory points to California's zero-emission vehicle mandate. This regulation had forced automakers to produce electric cars in the first place. By the early 2000s, lobbying efforts had successfully weakened the mandate. With the regulatory pressure gone, GM may have seen no financial reason to continue the EV1 program, and wanted to eliminate any lingering liability or proof that a successful electric car was possible. Destroying the evidence would make it easier to argue that the technology just wasn't ready. Whatever the true reason, the result was the same. The EV1, a car that had inspired a movement, was gone. The protests eventually faded, the last cars were collected, and the crushing continued until only a handful remained, mostly disabled and donated to museums or universities as static displays. The electric dream, for a time, was dead. The story of the EV1's recall is a powerful cautionary tale. It shows how innovation can be stifled by corporate decisions, and how passionate communities can rise up in its defense. It's a sad chapter, but it's not the end of the story for the electric car. The seeds planted by the EV1 and its dedicated drivers would lie dormant for a few years, but they would eventually sprout again, leading to the electric vehicle revolution we see today. The legacy of the EV1 isn't just one of a car that was crushed. but of a powerful idea that simply refused to die. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the EV1's tragic end. It's a complex and emotional part of automotive history, and it sets the stage for everything that came after. If you found this story as compelling as I do, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. We love having you as part of our community. See you in the next video. Have you ever heard the story of the car that was too good to survive? It sounds like a myth, but it's a true, heartbreaking chapter in automotive history. Let's talk about the crushed dreams of the General Motors EV1. Imagine a future right here on Earth in the mid-90s. A sleek, futuristic car glides silently down the street, emitting zero pollution. It's not a sci-fi prop. It's the EV1, the first mass-produced electric car from a major automaker in the modern era. People who leased them didn't just drive them. They fell in love with them. They were quick, and represented a cleaner, better tomorrow. Celebrities, engineers, and everyday families became passionate advocates. It felt like the dawn of a new age. The electric revolution had begun. But then, the story takes a dark turn. After the lease periods ended, General Motors made a shocking decision. They didn't want to sell the cars. They didn't want to renew the leases. They wanted the cars back. All of them. Drivers pleaded, offered to buy their beloved cars outright, even held vigils. They saw the EV1 as more than just a machine. It was a promise. A promise of cleaner air, of technological progress, of a future free from dependence on fossil fuels. They had experienced that future, and they weren't going to give it up without a fight. Imagine having a glimpse of a better world, only to have it snatched away. Despite the protests, GM systematically rounded up the surviving EV1s. They weren't resold. They weren't donated to museums or universities for study. Instead, hundreds of these perfectly functional, revolutionary vehicles were loaded onto transporters and hauled to a remote desert proving ground in Mesa, Arizona. What happened next is the part that still shocks people today. Under the harsh Arizona sun, the EV1s were lined up. And one by one, they were crushed, flattened, destroyed. Secretly filmed footage of this automotive graveyard eventually leaked, and the images were devastating. It looked like a scene from a dystopian movie, the very symbols of a clean future being systematically annihilated by the corporation that created them. The outrage was immediate and intense. For the environmentalists and the drivers who had poured their hearts into this movement, it was a profound betrayal. Why would a company spend $1 billion to develop a revolutionary car only to intentionally destroy it? This wasn't just about recycling old metal. This was the deliberate crushing of an idea. It felt like a public execution of the electric dream. GM claimed the program was an unprofitable experiment and that they couldn't support a small fleet of vehicles with parts in service indefinitely. They cited liability concerns. But to the EV1 community, these excuses rang hollow. To them, it seemed like a calculated move to kill the electric car and protect the incredibly profitable status quo of gasoline engines, oil changes, and the entire infrastructure built around them. Was it pressure from the oil industry? A fear of disrupting their own business model? The debate still rages today. The destruction of the EV1 became a powerful symbol. It wasn't just the death of a car. It was the death of a movement, or so it seemed at the time. The dream of a mainstream electric vehicle, which had felt so close, was literally crushed into a pile of scrap metal. The momentum was gone. The hope faded. It would take more than a decade for the electric car to make a serious comeback. But here's the fascinating epilogue to this tragic story. The crushed dreams of the EV1 didn't stay buried in the desert. The anger and passion of those early adopters planted a seed. The story of the EV1 and its demise inspired a new generation of engineers and entrepreneurs. People who saw what happened and said, "Never again." Think about the electric cars you see on the road today. Many of their creators, including key figures at companies like Tesla, directly cite the EV1 saga as a major inspiration. They learned from GM's mistakes. They learned that you don't just build a great car. You have to fight for it. You have to build the infrastructure, change public perception, and be willing to challenge the old guard. The ghost of the EV1 haunted the auto industry, a constant reminder of what was lost and what could be possible. So, in a strange way, the death of the EV1 was the spark that ignited the modern EV revolution. Its destruction created martyrs for the cause, and a powerful narrative that fueled the very movement it was intended to stop. The dream wasn't crushed. It was just put on hold. And today, as you see electric cars quietly gliding down your own street, you're seeing the legacy of the EV1, a dream reborn from the dust of the Arizona desert. What do you think? Was GM justified in its decision, or was it one of the biggest corporate blunders of the 20th century? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please give this video a like and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden histories of technology. See you in the next one. Welcome back to our series on the rise, fall, and resurrection of the electric car. Today, we're diving into Chapter 14, and it's a big one. The story of a documentary that blew the lid off the entire EV1 scandal and brought it roaring back into the public eye. The year is 2006, and a film titled Who Killed the Electric Car hits the screens. This wasn't just a movie. It was a cultural event that reignited a fire that many thought had been extinguished for good. For years, the story of the EV1 had been a kind of urban legend among car enthusiasts and environmentalists. A futuristic car that appeared, won hearts, and then mysteriously vanished. But this documentary, directed by Chris Payne, wasn't content with legends. It set out to be a full-blown investigation, a cinematic expose. The film gathered the key players, the engineers who built the car, the drivers who leased it, and even some of the executives involved, and put them on camera. For the first time, the fragmented pieces of the puzzle were being assembled into one cohesive, and frankly shocking narrative for a global audience. The film meticulously lays out its case, pointing fingers not just at General Motors, but at a whole cast of powerful suspects. It was like a real-life murder mystery, but instead of a person, the victim was a revolutionary piece of technology. The documentary explored the complex web of interests that seemed to align against the EV1. First, there were the oil companies. It is no secret that a world running on electricity would be a direct threat to their business model, which had dominated the 20th century. The film presents evidence suggesting that the oil industry saw the electric car not as innovation, but as a direct competitor to be neutralized. Their immense lobbying power in Washington, D.C. gave them the political leverage to influence policies and regulations that could either help or hinder the adoption of new energy technologies. Then, there was the U.S. government itself. The film argues that political motivations and alliances with powerful industries played a huge role. It delves into how the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, initially created the mandate that forced automakers to produce zero-emission vehicles, only to weaken and eventually dismantle that very same mandate under intense pressure. The documentary frames this not just as a policy reversal, but as a capitulation to corporate interests over public good and environmental health. It questioned the integrity of the very institutions meant to protect consumers and the planet. And of course, at the center of it all was General Motors. The film doesn't paint GM with a simple, villainous brush. Instead, it portrays a complex, perhaps even conflicted, corporate giant. On one hand, you had the brilliant engineers within GM who poured their hearts and souls into creating the EV1, believing they were building the future. On the other hand, you had the corporate leadership, the bean counters, and the marketing departments who, according to the film, were terrified of what the EV1 represented. The documentary argues that GM was afraid of its own creation. The EV1 was a paradigm shift. It required less maintenance, no oil changes, no mufflers, no complex combustion engine parts to replace. This threatened the lucrative dealership service and parts business, a cornerstone of their revenue. Furthermore, successfully selling the EV1 would mean admitting that the internal combustion engine, the product they had perfected and sold for a century, was becoming obsolete. It would force a complete and costly overhaul of their entire manufacturing and business infrastructure. So the film posits, GM engaged in a strategy of self-sabotage. They limited production, used uninspired marketing, and emphasized the car's limitations, like its range, rather than its groundbreaking benefits. It was as if they were trying to prove that the public didn't want a car they were never truly trying to sell. One of the most powerful and emotionally charged parts of the documentary is the footage of the EV1S being rounded up and destroyed. We see the cars, once symbols of a clean tech future, being loaded onto transporters, taken to a desert scrap yard, and systematically crushed. The lessees, who had fallen in love with their cars, held vigils and protests, trying to save them. They offered to buy the cars outright to take on all liability, but GM refused. The company's official line was that they couldn't support a small fleet of vehicles with spare parts in service. But to the people in the film, and to the audience watching, it looked like GM was deliberately destroying the evidence, ensuring the EV1 could never make a comeback. It was a funeral for a machine, and it was heartbreaking. The impact of who killed the electric car was immediate and profound. It took the EV1 story from a niche topic to a mainstream conversation. People who had never even heard of the EV1 were suddenly outraged. The film's compelling narrative and its whodunit structure made the complex issues of corporate policy, energy politics, and technological suppression accessible to everyone. It wasn't just a story about a car anymore. It was a story about how powerful forces can stifle progress for their own gain. Public opinion, which had been largely indifferent, began to shift dramatically. The world started asking questions again, but this time with more force and more knowledge. Why were these amazing cars destroyed? Who really benefited from their disappearance? Is it possible that the technology for a cleaner, more sustainable future was deliberately held back? The film gave a voice to the frustration and suspicion that many people felt, but couldn't articulate. It armed them with facts, interviews, and a clear, compelling story. The narrative was no longer controlled by corporate press releases. It was now in the hands of the public. This shift was a crucial turning point. It laid the groundwork for the second wave of the electric vehicle revolution, a wave that was about to crest in a way that no one, not even the creators of the EV1, could have ever imagined. The questions raised by the film demanded answers, and a new generation of innovators was listening, ready to provide them. Thanks so much for watching. The story is only getting more exciting from here, so if you're enjoying this journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter. See you in the next video. Welcome back to our series. Today we're diving deep into Chapter 15, GM's official explanation. This is where the story takes a sharp, controversial turn. So why did GM pull the plug on what many saw as the future of transportation? Let's break it down. Officially, General Motors pointed to three main culprits: high costs, low consumer demand, and the limitations of battery technology at the time. On the surface, these reasons seem plausible. The EV1 was undeniably expensive to produce. Each car was a handcrafted technological marvel, and the costs associated with its specialized components and assembly were substantial. GM argued that they were losing a significant amount of money on every single vehicle they leased. From a purely business perspective, a product that hemorrhages cash is not sustainable, no matter how innovative it is. This was their primary justification. The numbers simply didn't add up. Then there was the issue of demand. GM stated that despite the enthusiasm from a niche group of drivers, the broader public wasn't ready to embrace the electric car. They claimed that the waiting list, while real, didn't translate to the mass market numbers needed to justify continued production. Marketing an electric vehicle in an era dominated by cheap gasoline and a deeply entrenched culture of internal combustion engines was a monumental task. The argument was that the market just wasn't there yet. They were, in their view, too far ahead of their time, and the consumer base was not large enough to support the program. And finally, the Achilles heel of early electric vehicles: the battery. The lead-acid batteries used in the first generation of the EV1 offered a limited range, which was a major point of concern for potential adopters. Range anxiety wasn't just a buzzword. It was a real barrier. GM later introduced nickel metal hydride batteries that improved the range significantly. But even then, the technology was still developing. GM contended that the battery tech wasn't robust enough, reliable enough, or cheap enough to make the electric car a viable mainstream product. They felt they had pushed the existing technology to its absolute limit and hit a wall. So according to GM, it was a practical decision based on economic and technological realities. However, this official narrative was immediately and fiercely challenged. Critics, including many of the drivers who loved their EV1s and the engineers who built them, painted a very different picture. They didn't see a business making a tough but necessary decision. They saw a conspiracy. The counter-argument was simple and powerful. GM intentionally killed the electric car because it posed a direct threat to its core multi-billion-dollar business, selling gasoline-powered cars and their profitable spare parts. Let's explore this side of the argument, which is filled with passion and a deep sense of betrayal. Critics point out that GM never actually sold the EV1, they only leased them. This, they argue, was a deliberate strategy to maintain ultimate control. If they owned the cars, they could recall and destroy them at will, which is exactly what happened. Why not sell them to the passionate drivers who were begging to buy them outright, even for a high price? This decision alone fueled immense suspicion. It seemed less like a market failure and more like a carefully managed experiment designed to be terminated. Furthermore, critics accused GM of self-sabotage when it came to marketing. While there were some initial flashy commercials, the overall marketing effort was seen as lackluster and half-hearted. They argued that GM, a marketing powerhouse that could sell millions of trucks and SUVs, somehow couldn't figure out how to market a revolutionary car that had a built-in fan base and a waiting list. Was it incompetence? Or was it intentional? Many believed it was the latter, a deliberate move to suppress demand and then use the manufactured low demand as an excuse to shut the program down. And what about the battery technology? The claim that it was too limited was also disputed. While the range wasn't infinite, many drivers found it perfectly adequate for their daily commutes. They adapted their lifestyles and loved the experience. The development of the nickel metal hydride battery proved that the technology was rapidly improving. Critics argued that with continued investment and research, the kind of R&D that a giant like GM could easily afford, the battery issue could have been overcome. Instead of investing in the future, it seemed GM chose to protect its past. The argument is that they didn't hit a technological wall. They simply stopped trying to climb it. This perspective suggests that the EV1 was too successful for its own good. An electric car requires far less maintenance than a gasoline car. There are no oil changes, no spark plugs, no mufflers, no complex transmission systems. A huge portion of an automaker's and a dealership's profit comes from service and parts. A successful electric car would have decimated this lucrative revenue stream. Was GM willing to cannibalize its most profitable business segment for a cleaner, but less profitable future? The critics say no. They believe GM saw the long-term threat and acted decisively to eliminate it, preserving the status quo and the profits that came with it. So here we stand at a crossroads of two conflicting narratives. On one hand, you have GM's official story, a tale of pragmatic business decisions driven by high costs, low demand, and technological limitations. It's a logical, if disappointing, explanation from a massive corporation focused on its bottom line. On the other hand, you have a story of intrigue and corporate sabotage. A visionary product murdered by its own parent company to protect a century-old, fossil fuel-dependent business model. It is a narrative that speaks to a deeper mistrust of corporate power and a mourning for a future that was snatched away. What's fascinating is that both sides have valid points. The EV1 was expensive. The market for it was, at the time, a niche. The battery technology did have limitations. But it's also true that GM's actions, like the lease-only model and the controversial recall and crushing of the cars, are hard to reconcile with a company that was genuinely trying to make the program succeed. The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the gray area between these two extremes. It wasn't just one thing, but a complex interplay of economic pressures. CORPORATE inertia, fear of change, and perhaps a tragic lack of vision. Thinking about this, it makes you wonder about the turning points in history. What if GM had made a different choice? What if they had embraced the EV1, invested in the technology, and truly tried to lead the electric revolution they had started? How different would our roads, our cities, and our air quality be today? It's a question that's impossible to answer, but it's one that continues to fuel the debate and the legend of the car that was too good to live. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive. It's a complex part of the story, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which side of the argument do you find more convincing? Be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter in this incredible story. We'll see you in the next one. In the shadow of the crusher, where hundreds of EVs met their untimely end, a handful of stories took a different turn. This is Chapter 16, The Survivors. Not every EV1 was destined for the scrap heap. A precious few, numbering somewhere between 20 and 40, were granted a reprieve. Their fate wasn't destruction but donation. These chosen few were sent to museums, engineering schools, and universities across the country, places of learning and preservation. It seemed like a noble gesture, a way to honor the groundbreaking technology they represented. But this act of preservation came with a catch, a cruel and unusual condition that would forever alter their legacy. General Motors stipulated that every single donated EV1 had to be completely and permanently disabled. The heart of the car, its revolutionary electric drivetrain, was to be ripped out. The motor, the controller, the gear reduction, all the components that made the EV1 the whisper-quiet marvel it was, were removed and destroyed. The battery packs were, of course, gone. Even the wiring harnesses connecting these vital organs were severed. The cars were lobotomized, transformed from cutting-edge vehicles into empty, lifeless shells. GM's instructions were explicit. Under no circumstances could these cars ever be driven again. They were to be static displays, nothing more. Imagine the scene at these institutions. A truck arrives, bearing a futuristic silver teardrop of a car. Students and professors gather, excited to get their hands on a piece of automotive history, a vehicle that promised a different kind of future. They peer inside, marveling at its advanced design. But when they pop the hood, they find a void. Where the pulse of an electric motor should be, there is only emptiness. The very soul of the machine has been exorcised. The car that was famous for its performance, its silent glide, its zero emissions, was now rendered inert, a ghost in the machine. It was a frustrating, almost insulting condition for the engineers and educators who received them. They had the body, but the spirit was gone. Why would GM do this? The official line was liability. The company claimed they couldn't risk an unsupported, experimental vehicle being on the road. They feared lawsuits if something went wrong, if a component failed, if someone got hurt. Without a service network or spare parts, they argued, it was simply too dangerous. But to many, this explanation rang hollow. Was it really about safety, or was it about control? Was GM so afraid of the EV1's potential that they had to ensure, beyond any doubt, that not a single one could ever challenge the gasoline status quo again? It felt less like a safety precaution and more like a final, definitive statement. The electric car experiment was over, and this is the proof. So these survivors became silent monuments. At the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., an EV1 sits as a testament to American innovation, but it's an innovation frozen in time. At universities like the University of California, Davis, a pioneer in electric vehicle research, an EV1 served as a classroom model, a case study in brilliant engineering, but also a lesson in corporate decision-making. Students could study its lightweight aluminum frame, its advanced aerodynamics, its magnesium wheels. They could learn from its design, but they could never experience its magic. They could never feel the instant torque or the surreal silence of its ride. The car was a textbook you could sit in, but never drive. These display cars became objects of fascination and pilgrimage for EV enthusiasts. People would travel to see them, to pay their respects. They'd take pictures, peer through the windows, and touch the smooth, composite body panels. There was a sense of melancholy surrounding these exhibits. Here was the future, preserved in amber. It was a relic of a revolution that was stopped in its tracks. Each car was a silent witness to what could have been. It stood as a symbol of a promise unfulfilled, a reminder of the day the future was cancelled. Visitors would look at the car and then at the plaque next to it, which often told a sanitized version of its story, and wonder, why? Why did they have to kill it? Over the years, the stories of these survivors took on a life of their own. Rumors circulated about rogue engineers secretly stashing away drivetrains, hoping to one day resurrect a disabled car. A community of hackers and hobbyists, known as the EV1 Club, dreamed of reverse engineering the missing components. The challenge was immense. The motor controller, the car's electronic brain, was a complex, proprietary piece of technology that GM had guarded jealously. Recreating it from scratch would be a monumental task. Yet, the dream persisted. For these enthusiasts, bringing an EV1 back to life wasn't just a technical challenge. It was a symbolic act of defiance. It was about reclaiming a piece of the future that had been taken away. One of the most famous survivors resides at the Peterson Automotive Museum in Los Angeles. It sits proudly among other iconic vehicles, a silver teardrop in a sea of chrome and steel. But unlike the roaring V8 South and classic hot rods around it, its power lies in its silence. It tells a story not just of engineering prowess, but of corporate politics, environmental aspirations, and consumer passion. It represents a critical turning point in automotive history. For the thousands who see it every year, it's not just a car. It's a conversation starter. It forces us to ask difficult questions about technology, energy, and the forces that shape our world. The decision to cripple the surviving EV1S had an unintended consequence. Instead of erasing the car from memory, it amplified its myth. By making them unattainable forbidden fruit, GM inadvertently turned the EV1 into a legend. The empty engine bays became a powerful symbol of lost potential. The act of disabling them was so dramatic, so final, that it fueled the narrative of a conspiracy against the electric car. The survivors weren't just museum pieces. They were evidence. They were the physical embodiment of the story told in the documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car?, standing as silent, silver witnesses for the prosecution. Looking at one of these inert machines today, you can't help but feel a strange mix of admiration and sadness. You admire the sheer brilliance of the design, the forward thinking that went into every curve and component. It looks modern even now, decades later. But you also feel a profound sense of loss for the momentum that was squandered. These cars were more than just a product. They were a movement. They were driven by people who believed in a cleaner, better way to get around. And when the cars were taken away, that belief didn't just disappear. It went underground, it simmered, it waited. The surviving F1S, in their enforced silence, became the keepers of that flame. They are monuments not to failure, but to a dream deferred. A powerful reminder that even when you crush the machine, you can't always kill the idea. Thank you for watching. If you've been moved by the story of the EV1, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. For more deep dives into the history of technology and innovation, your support helps us tell these important stories. See you next time. Welcome back to our series, where we're uncovering the hidden history of electric vehicles. Today, we're diving into Chapter 17, Seeds of a New Generation. It's a story of how an idea, even one that seems to have failed, can plant the seeds for a revolution. In our last episode, we witnessed the heartbreaking end of the GM EV1. We saw these futuristic cars, loved by their drivers, unceremoniously crushed and shredded. It looked like the end of the road for the modern electric car, but was it? The truth is, while the physical cars were destroyed, the spirit and the technology of the EV1 refused to die. It became a ghost in the machine, a silent force that would guide the next wave of automotive innovation. Think about the incredible team of engineers and visionaries at General Motors who poured their hearts and souls into the EV1 project. These weren't just employees clocking in and out. They were pioneers. They had tasted the future. They had driven it. They had built it. And they believed in it. When GM pulled the plug, did that passion simply vanish? Absolutely not. It scattered like dandelion seeds in the wind, ready to take root in new, more fertile ground. This diaspora of talent is one of the most crucial, yet often overlooked, parts of the EV1 story. These engineers, now free agents, carried with them an invaluable treasure: hands-on experience. They had tackled the immense challenges of battery management, powertrain efficiency, and lightweight aerodynamics. They had failed, learned, and succeeded in ways no other group in the world had. They were, quite literally, the world's leading experts in building a modern electric car from the ground up. And where did they go? They went everywhere. Some stayed within the automotive giant, channeling their knowledge into new, more palatable projects for the time. One of the most direct descendants of the EV1's DNA was the Chevrolet Volt. You can see the lineage clearly. The Volt was a plug-in hybrid, a sort of bridge between the gasoline world and the all-electric future. It was GM's way of saying, okay, maybe the world wasn't ready for a pure EV, but we haven't given up on electrification. Many of the same engineering principles learned from the EV1-like battery thermal management and regenerative braking were refined and implemented in the Volt. It was a compromise, yes, but it kept the flame of electric propulsion alive within the walls of America's largest automaker. The Volt allowed a new generation of drivers to experience the thrill of electric torque and silent driving, even if it was just for the first 40 miles. It was a crucial stepping stone, and it wouldn't have been possible without the lessons learned from the EV1's failure. But the most dramatic and impactful legacy of the EV1 was happening outside of Detroit, in the sunny, optimistic landscape of Silicon Valley. At the time, a small, ambitious startup was grappling with a monumental task: to build a high-performance electric sports car that would shatter every stereotype about EVs being slow, boring, and weird-looking. That startup was Tesla Motors. In the early 200s, Tesla was a handful of engineers with a bold idea but a mountain of technical hurdles. They were trying to cram thousands of laptop-style lithium-ion battery cells into a car and make them work safely and efficiently. Who had experience with this kind of radical battery pack design and management? The veterans of the EV1 program. It's no coincidence that key talent who had worked on the EV1 found their way to Tesla. They brought with them the battle scars and the hard-won wisdom from their time at GM. They understood the complexities of battery chemistry, the nuances of motor control, and the importance of software in a way that few others did. They helped the early Tesla team avoid pitfalls that could have doomed the company. They were the seasoned mentors who could say, "We tried that on the EV1, here's what went wrong. And here's how we can do it better." The conceptual link between the EV1 and the original Tesla Roadster is undeniable. Both were two-seater cars focused on performance and efficiency, designed to prove what an electric vehicle could be. The Roadster was, in many ways, the spiritual successor to the EV1, but with a different philosophy. While the EV1 was a product of a massive corporation, cautiously dipping its toes in the water, the Roadster was the all-in bet of a nimble startup. It was faster, had a longer range, and was unapologetically a performance car. It took the promise of the F1 and cranked it up to 11. So you see, the ghost of the EV1 was everywhere. It was in the quiet hum of a Chevrolet Volt pulling out of a driveway. It was in the blistering acceleration of a Tesla Roadster leaving a sports car in its dust. The knowledge, the patents, the passion, it all lived on. But the influence wasn't just technical. The public demise of the EV1 created a powerful narrative. It created martyrs. The documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car?, turned the story into a modern-day fable, a tale of corporate intrigue and squandered potential. It angered and inspired a whole generation of consumers, engineers, and entrepreneurs. It created a vacuum, a sense of injustice that people were determined to correct. This public outcry created a market demand that couldn't be ignored. People who had leased the EV1 became lifelong evangelists. They had experienced the future, and they weren't going to let it be forgotten. They wrote letters, they held vigils, and they told everyone they knew how amazing these cars were. This grassroots movement created a fertile ground for companies like Tesla to plant their seeds. They weren't just selling a car. They were selling the fulfillment of a promise that had been broken. When you look at the EV landscape today with nearly every major automaker racing to build compelling electric cars, it's easy to think this all happened overnight. But it didn't. This entire revolution stands on the shoulders of that sleek, silver, teardrop-shaped car from the 1990s. The EV1 was the pioneer that took the arrows. It was the scout that mapped the treacherous territory. Its journey proved that the technology was viable and, more importantly, that people would love it if given the chance. The physical cars may have been turned into scrap metal, but the idea they represented was bulletproof. The EV1 died so that the electric car could live. Its sacrifice ignited a passion and spread knowledge that directly fueled the projects that would ultimately succeed where it had been forced to fail. The Chevrolet Volt, the Tesla Roadster, and by extension, every single modern EV you see on the road today owes a debt of gratitude to that failed experiment. The ghost of the EV1 isn't a spooky apparition, it's a guiding light. It's a reminder that even in failure, there are seeds of future success. It's a testament to the power of a dedicated team and a revolutionary idea. The EV1 may have lost the battle, but its legacy ultimately helped win the war for the future of transportation. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. It's a story that deserves to be told, and we're so glad you're here to listen. If you're enjoying this deep dive, please hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter in our history of the electric vehicle. We'll see you next time. By the late 2000s, a new player entered the electric vehicle arena, ready to pick up the torch that General Motors had seemingly dropped. That player was Tesla Motors. The automotive world was still grappling with the ghost of the EV1, a car that promised the future but vanished before its time. But where GM saw a dead end, a visionary entrepreneur saw a new beginning. Elon Musk, a name that would soon become synonymous with electric vehicles, didn't shy away from the past. He openly praised GM's initial effort with the EV1, acknowledging its groundbreaking nature. But he was also its sharpest critic. Musk famously called the EV1 a vision that came too early. He understood the core problem. The technology, specifically the battery technology, wasn't quite there yet. The lead-acid batteries of the EV1 era were heavy, offered limited range, and had a short lifespan. They were the anchor holding back a brilliant idea. But what if you could take that same brilliant idea, a mass-market electric car, and give it a new heart? What if you could power it with something better, something lighter, more powerful, and longer-lasting? This was the pivotal question. Tesla's answer was lithium-ion batteries. These were the same types of batteries powering laptops and cell phones, but on a massive automotive scale. It was a gamble, a huge one. No one had ever built a production car using thousands of these small cylindrical cells wired together, but it was a gamble that would change everything. The idea was reborn not just with better batteries, but with a completely different philosophy. This wasn't about a compliance car to satisfy government mandates. This was about creating a car that people would desire, a car that was better than its gasoline-powered counterparts in every way. It needed to be faster, safer, and more exciting to drive. This mission was infused with bold, unapologetic marketing that captured the imagination of the public. Tesla wasn't just selling a car. They were selling the future, a sustainable, high-tech dream on four wheels. Tesla's first act was the Roadster, a high-performance electric sports car that shattered perceptions. It was built on the chassis of a Lotus Elise, but its soul was pure electricity. The Roadster proved that electric cars didn't have to be slow, quirky, or compromised. It could go from 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, a figure that put it in supercar territory. It was a statement piece, a halo car designed to grab headlines and prove the potential of their battery technology. It was expensive, impractical for most, and produced in limited numbers, but its impact was monumental. It showed the world what was possible. The Roadster was the conversation starter. The car that followed, the Model S, was the revolution. Unveiled in 2009 and launched in 2012, the Model S was a full-sized luxury sedan designed from the ground up to be electric. It wasn't a modified gasoline car. It was a clean-sheet design that took full advantage of its electric powertrain. Without a large engine in the front, it had a front trunk for extra storage. The flat battery pack under the floor gave it an incredibly low center of gravity, resulting in spectacular handling. And inside, a massive 17-inch touchscreen dominated the dashboard, controlling everything from navigation to climate. It felt less like a car and more like a gadget from Silicon Valley. The Model S wasn't just a car. It was an experience. It offered blistering acceleration, a silent and smooth ride, and a range that finally made electric cars practical for long-distance travel. With its own dedicated supercharger network, Tesla solved the road trip anxiety that had plagued earlier EVs. You could now drive across the country, stopping for a quick charge just like you would at a gas station. It won countless awards, including Motor Trend's Car of the Year, a first for an all-electric vehicle. The message was clear. The electric car had not only arrived, but it had also surpassed the competition. Where the EV1 was a quiet, almost apologetic experiment, Tesla was loud and proud. Elon Musk used social media like no CEO before him, creating a direct line to customers and fans, building a brand that was more like a tech giant than a traditional automaker. This direct-to-consumer sales model cut out the traditional dealership network, further disrupting the established order. They were rewriting the rules not just for what a car could be, but for how a car company could operate. The legacy of the EV1 was one of unfulfilled potential, a cautionary tale. The rise of Tesla turned that tale on its head. It demonstrated that the vision was not wrong, only the timing and execution were. By combining a relentless focus on battery technology, a brilliant software-first approach, and a marketing strategy that captured the zeitgeist, Tesla succeeded where GM had faltered. They didn't just build electric cars. They built a desirable brand, an ecosystem, and a movement. The Tesla era marked the point where electric vehicles transitioned from a niche curiosity to the undisputed future of the automotive industry. Every major car manufacturer was forced to react, accelerating their own EV programs in a race to catch up. The ghost of the EV1 could finally rest. Its original promise fulfilled by a new generation of innovators who stood on the shoulders of those early pioneers. The electric dream, once crushed, was now fully charged and accelerating into the mainstream. The vision that came too early had finally found its time. Thanks so much for watching this chapter of our journey. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. We have so much more to explore. See you in the next video.
Welcome back to our series on the epic history of electric vehicles. In our last episode, we left off on a somber note, witnessing the crushing of the EV1, a move that seemed to signal the end of GM's electric dream. For years, it felt like the spark had been extinguished. A footnote in automotive history, but as we all know, history has a funny way of repeating itself, often in the most unexpected ways. Fast forward to today, and the landscape couldn't be more different. The very same company that once recalled and dismantled its pioneering electric car has now made one of the most audacious promises in the industry. Imagine this. It's the 2020s. The conversation around climate change has reached a fever pitch. Innovators are pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and a new generation of drivers is demanding cleaner, more sustainable transportation. In this new world, General Motors, the giant of American auto manufacturing, steps forward and makes a stunning declaration. They announce a complete transformation, a pledge to go all in on electric. By 2035, GM aims for its entire light-duty vehicle lineup to be zero. This isn't just a minor course correction. It's a 180-degree turn from their past actions. The company that literally crushed the EV1 is now positioning itself as a leader in the electric revolution. So, what does this new commitment look like on the road? It's not just press releases and promises. We're seeing tangible, impressive new vehicles rolling off their assembly lines. Take the Chevrolet Bolt EV and its slightly larger sibling, the Bolt E UV. These cars weren't just a token effort. They were practical, affordable, and surprisingly zippy, bringing long-range electric driving to the masses. For many people, the Bolt was their first real-world encounter with an EV that could genuinely replace their car for daily driving without breaking the bank. It proved that GM was serious and had the engineering chops to compete. They had learned the lessons from the past and were ready to build on them. But GM's ambition didn't stop at the mainstream market. They set their sights on the luxury segment as well, a space where design, performance, and cutting-edge technology are paramount. Enter the Cadillac Lyriq. This vehicle is more than just an electric SUV. It's a statement. With its dramatic styling, a massive 33-inch curved display on the inside, and a smooth, powerful ride. The Lyriq showed that GM could blend its legacy of luxury with a forward-thinking electric platform. It's a car designed to turn heads and challenge established luxury EV players. The Lyriq represents a new era for Cadillac, and for GM as a whole, proving that electric doesn't mean compromising on comfort or style. It's a bold vision of an all-electric future, wrapped in a beautifully sculpted package. The electric wave is also sweeping through GM's most iconic and rugged brands. What's more American than a massive, powerful pickup truck? GM answered that question by resurrecting a legendary nameplate, the Hummer. But this isn't the gas-guzzling behemoth of the past. The new GMC Hummer EV is an all-electric suit. We're talking about a vehicle that can churn out up to 1,000 horsepower and go from 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds. It's an absolute beast, packed with wild features like crab walk mode that allows it to drive diagonally. The Hummer EV completely redefines what a truck can be, blending extreme off-road capability with mind-bending electric performance. It's a symbol of how GM is leveraging its heritage while rocketing into the future. And it's not just the Hummer. The upcoming Chevy Silverado EV promises to bring this electric power to one of the best-selling trucks in America, a move that could truly revolutionize the heart of the automotive market. This incredible pivot from GM didn't happen in a vacuum. It was driven by a combination of factors. Intense competition from new EV startups, shifting consumer preferences, and increasingly strict government regulations on emissions around the globe. GM's leadership recognized that the future of the automobile was electric, and to survive and thrive, they had to embrace it wholeheartedly. This led to massive investments in battery technology, most notably their Ultium platform. Ultium is a flexible, modular battery system designed to underpin a wide range of vehicles, from compact cars to heavy-duty trucks. This strategic approach allows GM to scale up production efficiently and reduce costs, making EVs more accessible for everyone. It's the technological backbone of their 2035 promise, a tangible plan to make their all-electric vision a reality. When you stand back and look at the whole story, it's truly remarkable. The journey has come full circle. The engineers and advocates who poured their hearts into the EV1 back in the 90s were vindicated. Their vision, which seemed lost for a time, has been reborn, bigger and bolder than ever before. The same corporation that once viewed electric cars as a compliance-driven niche now sees them as its very future. The company that took away the keys to the EV1 is now handing over the keys to a new generation of electric vehicles. From the practical Bolt to the luxurious Lyriq and the formidable Hummer EV, it's a powerful lesson in how ideas can endure, how markets can shift, and how even the largest industrial giants can change course. The story of GM and the electric car is a microcosm of the entire automotive industry, a struggle and eventual embrace of a new paradigm. It's a story of failure, regret, and ultimately, redemption. The ghost of the EV1 still looms, but now it serves as a reminder not of an ending, but of a beginning that was simply ahead of its time. The dream of a clean, electric-powered future is no longer a fringe idea. It's the declared mission of one of the world's most influential automakers. And that brings us to the end of this chapter in our journey through the history of the electric car. What a ride it's been, from the earliest experiments to the rise, fall, and spectacular return of EVs. It's a story that continues to unfold every single day. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration. If you've enjoyed this series and want to see more deep dives into the technologies and stories that shape our world, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to ring the notification bell so you won't miss what's coming next. We have a lot more exciting topics to cover. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
So, we've reached the final chapter in our story. Think about it. In the mid-1990s, a major American automaker built and leased a car that was, by all accounts, futuristic. It was silent, it was quick, it had no tailpipe. It was a tangible piece of the 21st century that arrived a little too early. The EV1 wasn't a clunky experimental golf cart. It was a real, usable, and deeply loved automobile. It proved unequivocally that the electric car wasn't just a fantasy, it could be a reality. It demonstrated that you could build a vehicle that people would be passionate about, a vehicle that changed their entire perception of driving. It was a spark, but the world as a whole just wasn't ready. The infrastructure wasn't there. The political will was flimsy at best. And perhaps most importantly, the collective mindset hadn't caught up. The idea of plugging in your car instead of pumping it with gas was just too strange, too alien for the mainstream. The fear of change, both from consumers and from within the industry itself, was a powerful force. This fear, this resistance to a new paradigm, is what ultimately led to the EV1's recall and destruction. It's a somber part of the story, seeing those cars crushed, seeing a future being physically dismantled. It's tempting to see that as the end, a great idea snuffed out before its time. For years it seemed that way. The EV1 became a cautionary tale, a symbol of corporate timidity and a dream deferred. But that's not where the story truly ends. Because the people who drove the EV1 never forgot. The engineers who built it knew what they had accomplished. The activists who protested its destruction kept the memory alive. They became the keepers of the flame. They told the story over and over to anyone who would listen. They ensured that the EV1 wasn't just a footnote in automotive history. And slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The seeds planted by the EV1 began to sprout in the most unexpected places. Engineers who had worked on the EV1 project or were inspired by it scattered throughout the industry. They took their knowledge, their experience, and their passion with them. They knew the challenges, but they also knew the promise. They knew it could be done because they had seen it, they had touched it, they had driven it. A small, almost unknown startup in California, run by a handful of Silicon Valley engineers, was paying very close attention. They saw the EV1 not as a failure, but as a proof of concept. They saw the passion it ignited in its drivers. Those engineers who would go on to found Tesla Motors took the lessons of the EV1 to heart. They understood that you needed to build an electric car that was not just environmentally conscious, but desirable. A car that was fast, beautiful, and packed with technology. And it wasn't just Tesla. Every single electric vehicle on the road today, from the Nissan Leaf to the Ford Mustang Mach-E to the Hyundai Ioniq 5, owes a debt to that strange, teardrop-shaped car from the 90s. The EV1 normalized the very idea of a modern EV. It battled the early demons of range anxiety, public charging, and battery technology, so that future generations of cars wouldn't have to start from scratch. It forced a conversation. It asked the question, what if? Even if the world wasn't ready for the answer. So when we reflect on this story, it's not a tragedy. It's more complex than that. It's a cycle of innovation, suppression, and eventual triumphant vindication. The EV1 was the first draft, the beta test for the electric future we are now living in. The technology has evolved, the batteries are better, the charging is faster, but the core dream is the same. The dream of a cleaner, quieter, and more exciting way to move. The dream that the EV1 made real, if only for a fleeting moment. It's a powerful lesson about progress. Sometimes an idea is so far ahead of its time that it's destined to stumble. But a truly great idea never really dies. It goes underground, it waits, it evolves. It becomes a legend that inspires the next generation to pick up the torch and run with it. The physical EV1S may be gone, confined to museums and a few disabled survivors. But their spirit is everywhere. It's in every silent hum of an electric motor pulling away from a stoplight. It's in every new charging station being installed. It is in the eyes of a new generation of drivers who see electric cars not as a strange alternative, but as the natural, obvious choice. The EV1 wasn't a failure. It was a whisper of the future, one the world finally learned to hear. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the incredible story of the GM EV1. It's a piece of history that I think is incredibly important. If you enjoyed this documentary and want to see more deep dives into the stories that shaped our world, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It truly helps us continue to tell these tales. We'll see you in the next one. The quiet hum of an electric motor fades, leaving a gentle silence. It's a sound that's becoming more and more familiar on our streets, a whisper of the future. But this story, our story of the AV1, isn't just about a car. It's about a dream. A bold, audacious dream of a world powered by clean energy. A world where the air is fresher and the roads are quieter. The EV1 may have disappeared from our highways, a ghost of what could have been. But its spirit is everywhere. It's in the sleek lines of every Tesla that glides past, in the quiet efficiency of a Nissan Leaf, and in the powerful hum of a Ford Mustang Mach-E. The EV1 was the spark, the proof of concept that ignited a revolution. It showed the world what was possible, even if the world wasn't quite ready for it. Think about it. The engineers and designers at General Motors, they weren't just building a car. They were building a statement. They poured their hearts and minds into creating something truly revolutionary. They tackled immense challenges: battery technology, charging infrastructure, public perception. They had to invent solutions for problems nobody had even thought of yet. And for a brief, shining moment, they succeeded. The people who leased the EV1, they weren't just drivers. They were pioneers. They were the early adopters, the believers who saw the future and wanted to live in it. They embraced the quirks, planned their routes around charging stations, and became passionate advocates for a new way of driving. Their stories, their passion, their refusal to let the dream die, that's a crucial part of this legacy. They formed communities, shared tips, and demonstrated to a skeptical world that electric vehicles weren't just a novelty, they were a viable, enjoyable, and responsible way to live. When GM made the difficult decision to recall and crush the EV1S, it felt like a betrayal. A funeral for the future. Protests were held, vigils were lit, it seemed like the end. But ideas, true, powerful ideas, are much harder to crush than metal and plastic. The heartbreak and the anger from that moment didn't just fade away. They transformed into fuel. Fuel for a new generation of innovators, entrepreneurs, and activists. The engineers who worked on the EV1 project didn't just forget what they learned. They carried that knowledge with them, spreading out to other companies, seeding the industry with invaluable experience. The drivers who had tasted the electric future couldn't go back. They became the most vocal supporters for the next wave of electric cars. And entrepreneurs, like a certain Elon Musk, saw the passion and the unfulfilled demand. They saw the opening that the EV1 had created and then tragically left vacant. So, when you see an electric car today, remember the EV1. Remember the strange-looking two-seater coupe that dared to be different. It was the first chapter in a story that is still being written. It was the necessary failure that paved the way for overwhelming success. The EV1 wasn't just a car. It was a promise. a promise of a cleaner, better, and quieter tomorrow. And now, as we listen to the sounds of the night, the distant city hum, the gentle breeze, we can hear that promise being fulfilled. The electric revolution the EV1 started is no longer a distant dream. It's here, it's happening now. The road ahead is long and there are still challenges to overcome, but it's an electric road. And it all started with a car that dared to whisper a glimpse of the future. The EV1's journey may have ended, but its legacy is the silent, powerful, and hopeful hum of every EV on the road today, driving us all forward into that brighter future. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's a story that means a lot to me, and I hope you found it as fascinating as I do. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories about the technology that shapes our world. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, drive safe and dream big.